Welcome back to the Vanguard Vault family, and hello to every single one of you tuning in tonight. I hope you're all doing absolutely fantastic. Whether you're curled up in bed with the lights off, watching on your phone during a late-night shift, or even sneaking this in while the sun is still up, this is a journey you want to forget. Before we dive in, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments below because it always amazes me how our Vault family comes together from every corner of the globe to share these chilling stories. Now, let me set the scene. Imagine walking down a long, white corridor. The fluorescent lights above flicker, buzzing faintly. The air is stale, thick, and colder than it should be. You turn the corner, and for just a second, you see her. A nurse, dressed in a starched white uniform from another era, standing at the far end of the hall. Her face is pale, her eyes empty. You blink, she's gone, but you swear you can still hear the squeak of her shoes against the tile floor. For decades, urban explorers and former staff have whispered about this nurse, still making her rounds at Montano State Hospital, even though the last patient left long ago. But here it's the question, why do so many of Illinois' hospitals refuse to let go of their dead? Illinois is a state with a chilling history of mental institutions and sprawling hospitals, places built to heal, but remembered for tragedy. In their prime, they were filled with thousands of patients, the sick, the forgotten, the abandoned. Overcrowding, neglect, and unspeakable treatments turned hospitals into prisons of suffering. And when those doors finally closed, something remained. Some say it's trauma carved into the walls. Others believe it's the restless dead, patients who never checked out. And you, watching right now, what do you believe? Think about it. When you walk through an abandoned hospital, what exactly are you afraid of? Is it the possibility of ghosts? Or is it the reminder of what it means to lose control, to be forgotten, to suffer without escape? Hospitals carry a psychological weight unlike any other building. They're places of life and death, where final breaths are taken, where agony and despair are whispered into sterile walls. And maybe that's why, decades after they shut down, people still see shadows pacing the halls, still hear screams echoing through locked wards, still feel watched in rooms that should be empty. By the end of this documentary, you won't just hear stories. You'll question what it really means to die inside these walls. You'll wonder if death is an escape, or if these hospitals have trapped something much darker. We'll journey through Illinois' most haunted hospitals, Montano State Hospital, where disease and overcrowding led to horror, and where whispers and footsteps still echo. Bartonville Insane Asylum, haunted by the legendary gravedigger, Old Book, whose ghost weeps at funerals even after death. Forgotten wards of Elgin State Hospital, Jacksonville Developmental Center, and Lincoln State School, each holding shadows of their past. And along the way, we'll explore not just the ghost stories, but the psychology of fear itself. Why do abandoned hospitals draw us in? Are we chasing the dead, or running from the living memories they stir? So, wherever you're watching, late at night in total darkness, or in the middle of the day with sunlight pouring through your window, turn up the volume, because this is not a journey you'll want to pause. And remember, even if you don't believe in ghosts, these stories are born from real lives, real suffering, and real death. So I'll ask you, if you were alone in a silent, abandoned hospital, and you heard footsteps behind you, would you keep walking, or would you run? By the end of this journey, that question might not be so easy to answer. Our journey begins with one of Illinois' most infamous sites of suffering, Montano State Hospital. The birth of Montano. The year was 1929. The world was about to tumble into the Great Depression, and Illinois was already struggling with overcrowded institutions. To solve the problem, Montano State Hospital was built on a sprawling 1,200 acres of land in Kankakee County, just south of Chicago. From the outside, it looked almost like a small town. Rows of red brick buildings, gardens, a farm, and even its own fire department. But Montano was no paradise. It was built for thousands, and by the 1930s, it was already bursting with patients. Some came here for treatment, others were simply abandoned by their families. Poverty, illness, and shame filled its halls. By 1950, Montano housed nearly 8,000 patients, making it one of the largest mental hospitals in the United States. Imagine it. Endless wards of beds lined wall to wall, corridors echoing with voices, screams, and sometimes silence so heavy it felt alive. The tragedy of 1939. Among all its dark history, one event still lingers in Montano's memory, the typhoid fever outbreak of 1939. Within just a few weeks, more than 60 patients died, their lives cut short, not by mental illness, but by the very conditions of the hospital meant to care for them. Think of the terror spreading through the wards, patients watching others collapse, nurses overwhelmed and terrified, and bodies carried out one after another. Some believe the outbreak wasn't just a tragedy. It was a curse, a sign that Montano had been poisoned by suffering from the very start. Even today, urban explorers claim they can sense it. They describe walking into certain buildings and feeling their chest tighten, as though the air itself remembers the panic of that year. The haunted halls Montano officially closed in 1985, but the stories of what lingers behind never stopped. Shadow figures. Visitors often report seeing dark shapes dart across hallways. Some describe them as patients in hospital gowns, others as something less human. Outlines with no features, just heavy presences watching from the corners. Slamming doors. Even when every window is sealed, explorers hear heavy doors slam shut in distant corridors, echoing through the empty wards. Some say the sound is so violent it feels like the building itself is angry. Distant screams. The most chilling stories are the screams, sometimes faint, sometimes piercing. Former staff insist there's no mistaking them. They sound like the cries of patients who suffered in isolation, echoes of lives that ended in despair. One group of investigators swore they heard someone whisper their names inside the old administration building. They were alone, yet the sound was captured clearly on their recording equipment. Psychology of fear at Montano. But here's where the story gets even more unsettling. When we hear about haunted hospitals, our first instinct is to imagine ghosts. But think about the psychology at play here. These buildings are loaded with collective trauma. Thousands of people lived and died here, many of them in anguish. When you walk those halls, your brain is already primed to expect something. Every creak of the floor, every gust of wind, every trick of the light could become a ghost in your mind. So we have to ask, is Montano really haunted? Or is the human brain haunted by what it knows happened here? That's the tension that keeps Montano alive in legend. Even skeptics admit that the atmosphere feels wrong, as though the walls themselves are heavy with memory. A cliffhanger in the dark. But let's not stop here. Montano's tragedies are just the beginning. In fact, many of the most terrifying accounts come not from the history books, but from first-hand stories of staff and urban explorers who claim to have come face-to-face with Montano-esque ghosts. And if you thought shadow figures and screams were enough to chill your bones, just wait. Because what those witnesses describe will make you wonder if Montano is a hospital that ever truly closed its doors. If the history of Montano feels heavy, the personal accounts will chill you even deeper. Because while facts record the past, it's the stories of those who walked its halls that make the horrors feel alive. Voices of the past. Former staff members who worked at Montano during its later years often described the overwhelming sense of loneliness. Nurses spoke of wards so crowded they had to walk sideways just to pass between beds. Patients spent hours rocking back and forth, muttering to themselves or staring blankly at the ceiling. One nurse who worked the night shift in the 1970s recalled something she could never explain. She was making rounds when she heard footsteps pacing behind her. She turned, expecting to see a doctor, but the corridor was empty. The sound continued, keeping pace with her. She finished her rounds as quickly as she could and never worked that ward alone again. Other staff spoke of doors unlocking by themselves, or windows that would swing open even when bolted shut. To them, it felt as though Montano resisted closure, as if the building itself refused to let go of its inhabitants. Urban explorers and the living shadows. When Montano finally closed in 1985, the buildings were left to decay. Windows shattered, ceilings collapsed, and graffiti covered the walls. But instead of silence, The hospital filled with explorers, thrill seekers, and paranormal investigators. Some explorers described the overwhelming smell of disinfectant that lingers in certain rooms, even though the hospital hasn't been cleaned in decades. Others say they've walked into a hallway and seen a figure at the far end, only for it to vanish when they approached. One explorer, filming for a documentary, caught what appeared to be a glowing orb moving across a corridor. Skeptics dismissed it as dust, but those who were there insist it lit the hallway like a lantern, pulsing with energy before fading into nothing. Another group swore they saw a woman in white near the old isolation ward. They thought she was another explorer, until she turned the corner and they realized the hallway was a dead end. No one was there. The wandering patients. Perhaps the most unsettling stories are the ones of wandering patients. Explorers have reported hearing the shuffling sound of slippers on tile floors. Some claim to have seen figures in hospital gowns standing at windows, staring out into the night. On one occasion, a group of paranormal investigators said they saw the faint outline of a man sitting in a chair, rocking back and forth. When they approached, the chair was empty, but the motion continued, rocking slowly on its own. Locals say Montano's fields and tunnels are just as haunted. Workers reported hearing faint moans underground, where service tunnels once connected the buildings. Even passing by on the road at night, drivers claim to see shadows moving in lit-up windows, though the electricity has long been cut. Psychological echoes. But here is the question we have to ask. Why do so many people experience the same things? Shadowy figures, footsteps, cries in the night. These aren't just random events. Psychologists argue that places like Montano create what's called a trauma imprint. When a location witnesses extreme suffering, people visiting later may project those emotions outward, manifesting them as sounds or visions. In other words, the human brain turns the memory of trauma into a kind of haunting. But paranormal believers argue the opposite, that the sheer intensity of suffering creates an energy too powerful to disappear. That Montano isn't just haunted by memory, but by the souls of patients who can't find peace. Which side do you believe? Let's make this personal. Picture yourself standing in Montano's main corridor at night. The walls are peeling, the air is damp, and your flashlight catches dust floating like snow. Behind you, the sound of footsteps. Slow, heavy, getting closer. What would you do? Would you keep walking deeper into the asylum? Or would you run for the exit? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know how many of you would dare to stand your ground. And remember, Montano is only one part of Illinois haunted hospital history. Because if you think whispers and shadows are chilling, wait until you hear about Bartonville Insane Asylum, where a gravedigger's ghost still weeps over the dead. Montano may echo with screams, but Bartonville cries. If Montano is remembered for its shadows and screams, then Bartonville is remembered for something far more human. Tears. The birth of Bartonville. The Illinois Asylum for the Incurable Insane was first built in the late 1800s near Peoria, Illinois. Its original Gothic-style building was enormous, looming like a fortress over the rolling hills of Bartonville. Locals described it as terrifying even before it opened, but the building was never used. Architects claimed that its design was too oppressive, too inhumane, and it was torn down before it ever housed a single patient. In its place, a new asylum rose in the early 1900s, this time with hundreds of smaller cottage-style buildings meant to feel less like a prison and more like a community. Still, no amount of architecture could soften what Bartonville became. At its peak, it held thousands of patients, men and women who were abandoned by their families, locked away for decades, often until death. Old Book, the Gravedigger. And this is where Bartonville's most famous ghost story begins. Among the staff was a man named Manuel Bookbinder, better known as Old Book. He wasn't a doctor or a nurse. He was the hospital's gravedigger. His job was to bury the countless patients who died within the asylum's walls. But what made Old Book legendary was his compassion. Unlike so many who worked there, he cared deeply for the patients. Whenever a burial took place, Old Book could be seen standing by the grave, crying openly. Every single time. Doctors and patients alike remembered him weeping as the coffins were lowered into the ground. It did not matter if he knew the patient or not. Old Book mourned them as though each were his own family. He became a symbol of rare kindness in a place defined by sorrow. The day of his funeral. Eventually, Old Book passed away. His death was devastating for the asylum. The staff prepared his funeral, held in the asylum cemetery where he had buried so many others. Dozens of patients and workers gathered to pay their respects. As the service began, they heard something strange, the sound of sobbing. Many turned to look, and there he was, Old Book himself, standing in the distance, crying as the coffin was lowered into the earth. Witnesses swore it was unmistakable. His tall figure, his wrinkled face, his hands covering his eyes as tears streamed down. The crowd gasped. Some even screamed. The doctor leading the service turned pale, realizing what it meant. Old Book was already in the coffin, yet his spirit wept with them one last time. The weeping ghost. From that day forward, people claimed to see Old Book wandering the cemetery, weeping softly at fresh graves. Others heard his cries in the wind at night, long after the asylum closed. Even now, paranormal investigators who visit the grounds report the sound of faint sobbing carried through the trees. Some describe the sensation of being watched, only to turn and see a shadowy figure standing near the old burial ground. And almost every account shares one detail in common: overwhelming sadness. Unlike other hauntings that inspire fear, Bartonville's most famous ghost stirs something different: grief. To stand in that cemetery is to feel the weight of thousands of forgotten lives, mourned only by a man who refused to let them die in silence. The atmosphere of Bartonville. But Bartonville is more than Old Book's legend. The asylum itself is said to be haunted from top to bottom. Echoing halls. Visitors describe hearing footsteps pacing above them, even when the floors are empty. Whispering voices. Paranormal teams have recorded what sounds like patients speaking faintly, asking for help, or repeating the same phrases over and over. Cold spots. Entire rooms suddenly drop in temperature, sending chills through anyone who enters. The architecture of Bartonville only adds to the feeling. The cottages may have been less intimidating than Manteau's massive wards, but their decay today is haunting. Crumbling walls, broken windows, and peeling paint create the perfect stage for shadows that seem to move on their own. Here's the question: why does Bartonville affect people so deeply? Psychologists suggest it's because Bartonville reminds us of grief we don't want to face. Death is frightening enough, but to die forgotten with only a gravedigger to mourn you is a sorrow we carry as human beings. When we hear about Old Book's ghost, maybe we're not afraid of him. Maybe we're afraid of ending up like the patients he buried, alone, unremembered, crying out for someone to notice. Bartonville's legend is unlike any other. It isn't about demons or monsters. It's about humanity. It's about compassion in the darkest of places, and the possibility that even after death, love and grief can linger. But Bartonville doesn't just have one ghost story. Its cemetery might be guarded by Old Book, but the asylum's night shifts and graveyard workers reported hauntings that were far more terrifying. Because if Old Book weeps for the dead, others scream in anger. If the legend of Old Book leaves us with sorrow, the other stories from Bartonville drag us straight back into fear. Because while Old Book's ghost mourned, many others seemed to rage. The graveyard shift former workers often said the asylum was worst at night. The day might have been filled with the chaos of overcrowded wards, shouting patients, and endless duties. But when midnight rolled around, the silence became unbearable. Guards and nurses on the graveyard shift claimed they heard voices in the hallways, conversations happening in rooms that should have been empty. They'd unlock a door, only to find no one inside. One worker swore he heard a woman sobbing in the laundry room. He followed the sound through the dark, damp corridors, and when he finally reached the source, the crying stopped, leaving the room completely empty. But the moment he turned to leave, the sobbing began again, this time directly behind him. The screams from the ward's visitors and investigators say the abandoned wards are the most terrifying part of Bartonville today. Walking through the crumbling halls, they've reported sudden bursts of sound, blood-curdling screams echoing as though dozens of patients are crying out at once. In one account, a group of paranormal researchers set up recording equipment in an old dormitory. Hours later, when they reviewed the tape, they heard something horrifying. The sound of hundreds of footsteps rushing toward the microphone, followed by screams that grew louder and louder, and then stopped all at once. The researchers swore they had heard nothing with their own ears while inside. Whatever made those sounds was only captured on the recording. Apparitions in the window's local residents who drive past the ruins of Bartonville at night tell a similar story. Figures standing in the windows. Sometimes it's just a shape. Tall, human, unmoving. Other times it's clearer. Patients in gowns staring out, their eyes dark and hollow. And always, when drivers circle back for a second look, the windows are empty. One man claimed he saw a patient leaning against the glass, pressing his palm flat against the window pane. By the time the man stopped his car, the figure was gone, but the outline of a handprint lingered in the dust. Emotional terror. What makes Bartonville unique isn't just the fear, it is the emotions people feel when they visit. Investigators describe overwhelming waves of sadness, despair, and anxiety as soon as they step onto the grounds. Some have broken down crying without explanation. Others describe a crushing weight on their chest, as though the air itself is mourning. Psychologists might call this empathic resonance, the human brain picking up on the atmosphere of a place tied to immense suffering. But paranormal believers argue it as something more. The emotions of thousands of patients still bleeding into the present, and sometimes that grief twists into anger. Malevolent encounters. Not all the spirits of Bartonville are gentle like Old Book. One nurse in the 1940s claimed she was grabbed by unseen hands while working late in a ward. She felt fingers curl around her wrist, squeezing so hard she screamed. When she pulled free, the skin was marked with red impressions, like fingernails pressing deep into her flesh. In the modern era, explorers tell of being shoved or scratched. A paranormal team once reported hearing growls in the basement, a sound so guttural and inhuman that they fled the building in terror. Could this be the residue of violent patients, restless even after death? Or is it something darker, something feeding off the sorrow and fear of the asylum itself? Interactive question. So let me ask you, would you dare to walk through Bartonville's cemetery at midnight, knowing Old Book might be weeping in the shadows, or worse, that another spirit might be waiting to grab you? Drop your answer in the comments below. I want to know how many of you would take that risk, and how many would keep driving past without looking back. Bartonville's lasting reputation. Today, much of Bartonville has been torn down or left in ruins, but its reputation has never died. Ghost hunters travel from across the country just to step inside its crumbling walls. Paranormal TV shows have filmed entire episodes here, capturing everything from eerie voices to apparitions. And locals? Many refuse to go near it. They'll tell you Bartonville isn't just haunted, it's cursed. A place where sorrow runs too deep, where the dead never rest. A reflection before moving on. And maybe they're right, because Bartonville doesn't just frighten us, it forces us to confront something we don't like to face. Death, loneliness, suffering. The possibility that even in the afterlife, pain lingers. Old Book's tears remind us of compassion. But the screams, the shadows, and the hands reaching from the dark remind us of the opposite, of what happens when humanity is stripped away. So, what do you believe? Is Bartonville a place of memory, heavy with sorrow that tricks the mind? Or is it a place where the spirits of thousands still wander, crying out to be heard? Whichever answer you choose, Bartonville has carved its name into Illinois' haunted history. And the further we go, the darker these stories become. Because Bartonville may be terrifying, but Illinois still has more secrets to reveal. So far we've explored the tragic shadows of Montano and the sorrowful cries of Bartonville. But Illinois doesn't stop there. Across the state, hospitals and institutions carry reputations just as chilling, each with its own blend of history, tragedy, and ghostly legend. Let us take a journey through 3 more of Illinois' most haunted hospitals: Elgin State Hospital, Jacksonville Developmental Center, and Lincoln State School. Elgin State Hospital, the City of Shadows. Founded in 1872, Elgin State Hospital, also called Elgin Mental Health Center, was once the largest psychiatric facility in Illinois. At its peak, It sprawled across hundreds of acres, housing more than 8,000 patients in a maze of red brick buildings. Like Montano and Bartonville, Elgin became infamous for overcrowding, experimental treatments, and the slow decay of human dignity. But Elgin's hauntings are particularly well known. Urban explorers and staff alike tell stories of shadow people roaming the halls. These aren't vague shapes seen out of the corner of an eye. Witnesses describe tall, human-like figures with no faces, gliding across hallways and disappearing through walls. Some investigators claim the shadows even follow them, appearing closer and closer until they vanish completely. One explorer swore that while walking down a basement corridor, he saw a shadow rise up from the floor and stretch across the ceiling, blotting out the dim light from his flashlight. He left immediately and has never returned. Voices are another common report. Elgin's abandoned wards are said to echo with whispers, sometimes clear words like, "Help me," or "Get out." Paranormal teams have captured electronic voice phenomena, EVPs, with chilling results, including one tape where a man's voice mutters, "I'm still here." The scariest accounts, however, involve the tunnels beneath Elgin. Like many state hospitals, Elgin had underground service tunnels connecting its buildings. Today, they are crumbling, dark, and filled with stale air. Explorers claim the tunnels are alive with activity, footsteps echoing behind them, cold winds that come from nowhere, and the sound of someone breathing right over their shoulder. For many locals, the tunnels of Elgin aren't just haunted, they're cursed. Few dare to step inside. Jacksonville Developmental Center, the Forgotten Screams. If Elgin is known for its shadows, then the Jacksonville Developmental Center is remembered for its silence, a silence broken by screams that should no longer exist. Jacksonville was originally founded in the mid-1800s as the Illinois State Asylum and Hospital for the Insane. Over the decades, it became a facility for the mentally ill and developmentally disabled, housing thousands of patients. Like other institutions of its era, it was plagued by overcrowding, neglect, and inhumane treatments. It officially closed in 2012, leaving its sprawling campus abandoned. But locals insist that Jacksonville didn't close quietly. Neighbors report hearing screams at night, long drawn-out cries echoing from the empty buildings. Some describe them as children's voices, others as adult patients wailing in despair. Police have been called multiple times, only to find the grounds completely deserted. One urban explorer described walking through a patient ward when he suddenly felt a hand brush against his back. He turned, but no one was there. Moments later, he heard a voice whisper, "Don't leave me." Terrified, he ran out and refused to go back. Paranormal investigators have captured disturbing audio here as well, banging on doors, footsteps following their team, and even a loud scream so powerful that it drowned out their equipment. What makes Jacksonville especially eerie is its emptiness. Unlike Bartonville or Elgin, which retain decaying remnants of their past, many of Jacksonville's buildings stand stark and barren, stripped of furniture and equipment. And yet, those who enter say the atmosphere is suffocating, as if unseen eyes are watching from every corner. Lincoln State School and Colony, the agony of the forgotten. Perhaps the darkest of Illinois' forgotten institutions is the Lincoln State School and Colony, originally founded in 1877. This facility was designed for individuals with developmental disabilities, many of whom were abandoned by families who could no longer care for them. At its peak, Lincoln housed over 4,000 residents, most of them children. Conditions were notoriously harsh. Patients were often left in overcrowded dormitories, subjected to neglect, and forgotten by the outside world. Investigations in the mid-20th century exposed abuse, leading to national outrage. But even after reforms, Lincoln's reputation never recovered. It finally closed in the early 2000s, leaving behind a legacy of pain and, many believe, restless spirits. Visitors report the sounds of children crying in the empty dormitories. Some claim to hear the rhythmic pounding of fists on walls, as though patients are still begging to be released. Others describe apparitions of small figures darting through the halls, their faces blurred and indistinct. Perhaps the most terrifying stories involve the screams. Multiple explorers have sworn they heard agonizing cries that echoed through the buildings, bouncing from wall to wall until it felt like the entire structure was alive with suffering. One paranormal team recounted entering a classroom where toys had been left behind. As they set up their cameras, a ball rolled slowly across the floor, even though no one had touched it. Seconds later, the room filled with the sound of children's laughter, captured clearly on audio recorders, but heard by none of the team members in real time. The Lincoln State School's legacy is one of sorrow, abandonment, and loss. And the idea that the voices of those children might still linger is enough to haunt anyone who dares step inside. Stitching the stories together. Taken alone, each of these places, Elgin, Jacksonville, Lincoln, is chilling enough. But together, they form a tapestry of Illinois' haunted history. A history marked not just by ghosts, but by human suffering that refuses to stay buried. Elgin gives us shadows in the tunnels. Jacksonville delivers screams from empty halls. Lincoln forces us to hear the cries of forgotten children. And when you put those pieces together, you start to wonder, maybe Illinois isn't just a state with a few haunted hospitals. Maybe the very soil of Illinois is soaked with trauma, echoing in every abandoned ward and every silent corridor. The cliffhanger before analysis. So far, we've walked through darkness, grief, and horror. But here's the question that lingers. Why are we so drawn to these places? Why do thousands of people travel every year to wander abandoned hospitals, to chase the very fear that makes their hearts race? Are we simply chasing a thrill? Or are we trying to understand something deeper about ourselves? About death, trauma, and the possibility that the veil between worlds is thinner than we think? That's exactly what we'll explore next. The psychology of fear, the science of hauntings, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the ghosts of Illinois aren't just in our heads. We've wandered through the darkened wards of Montano, listened to the weeping of Old Book at Bartonville, and heard the screams that still echo from Elgin, Jacksonville, and Lincoln. But now it is time to step back, to ask the deeper question. Why do these places affect us so powerfully? Are we simply scaring ourselves with stories? Or is there truly something paranormal at work? Let's pull apart the psychology of fear, the science of hauntings, and the possibility that the shadows in Illinois' hospitals are more than just tricks of the mind. Why hospitals haunt us? First, let's think about the setting itself. Hospitals, especially psychiatric ones, are already symbols of human fragility. They are places where the sick and dying come to face their last moments, where pain, fear, and grief saturate the walls. For the living, just walking into an abandoned hospital instantly triggers unease. The smell of dust and mold, the creak of a door swinging open on its own, the echo of footsteps in a place that should be silent. All of these sensory cues feed directly into the amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear. Psychologists call this the uncanny space effect, when a place feels wrong, not because of what's there, but because of what's missing. A hospital should be full of people, doctors rushing, nurses calling orders, patients filling the beds. When it's empty, that absence becomes a presence in itself. Our minds fill in the void with imagined horrors. Trauma imprinted on place. Another explanation lies in the idea of emotional residue. Places like Montano or Lincoln witnessed generations of trauma, isolation, neglect, abuse, and death. Even if you don't believe in ghosts, those emotions can affect visitors in powerful ways. Think of it this way. Emotions are contagious. If you walk into a room where people were just laughing, you feel lighter, even if you don't know why. If you walk into a place where people were grieving, you feel heavy, even without context. Now imagine stepping into a building where thousands of patients suffered in silence, where treatments like electroshock and lobotomies were performed without mercy. That collective trauma can leave behind what researchers call psychic impressions. Skeptics might call it suggestion. We know the history, so we project our feelings onto the space. Believers argue the opposite, that the energy of suffering lingers, absorbed by the walls, floors, and air itself. And when we step inside, that energy reawakens, whispering to us through fear, sadness, or even apparitions. The psychology of ghost sightings. So, What about the actual ghosts? The shadows, the voices, the apparitions in the windows? Psychologists have long studied why people see or hear things in haunted places. One major factor is pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find patterns where none exist. A shadow in the corner becomes a human figure. The hum of an old pipe sounds like a whisper. The brain fills in the gaps because it craves meaning, even in randomness. Another factor is suggestibility. If you walk into Bartonville already knowing about Old Book, your mind is primed to interpret strange sensations as his ghost. This doesn't mean you reimagining it. It means your brain is filtering reality through expectation. But here's where things get interesting. Not all experiences can be explained so easily. When psychology falls short, some paranormal investigators argue that psychology explains part of the puzzle, but not all. Take the example of electronic voice phenomena, EVPs. At Elgin, researchers recorded voices saying, "Help me, and I'm still here." If no one heard those voices in real time, how do they appear on recordings? Skeptics claim it's just audio interference, but believers see it as proof that spirits are trying to communicate. Or consider the physical encounters. People being scratched, shoved, or grabbed by unseen hands. Psychology can explain hallucinations, but it can't explain red claw marks on someone's arm. And what about the stories that come from people who don't know the history? Time and again, visitors who were unaware of Bartonville's legends have described seeing a man crying in the cemetery, matching perfectly with the story of Old Book. Coincidence or evidence? Trauma loops, the theory of residual hauntings. One of the most fascinating theories in paranormal research is the idea of residual hauntings. This suggests that ghosts aren't always conscious entities. Sometimes they are simply recordings of trauma that replay over and over. Think of it like this. When a place experiences intense emotion, grief, terror, anger, it leaves behind an energetic scar. That scar plays back like a loop, and sensitive people can tune into it. This would explain why so many hauntings in Illinois' hospitals feel repetitive. The sobbing at Bartonville, the footsteps in Elgin's tunnels, the children's laughter at Lincoln. These aren't necessarily spirits reaching out. They might be echoes of moments frozen in time, playing endlessly in the fabric of the building itself. Intelligent hauntings, the spirits that respond. But then there are the other kind of hauntings, the ones that respond. When an investigator asks, "Is someone here?" and a voice answers yes. When an object moves on command. When footsteps follow you as you run. These are harder to dismiss. If residual hauntings are recordings, then intelligent hauntings suggest conscious entities, spirits of the dead still aware, still active, still unwilling to leave. Illinois has both kinds. Old Book's weeping may be residual, repeating endlessly at each funeral. But the voices calling explorers by name, or the hands gripping nurses in the dark, those point to intelligence, to something very much alive in death. Skepticism versus belief. Of course, not everyone agrees. For every paranormal investigator convinced of ghosts, there are scientists who insist it's all psychology, faulty memory, or the brain reacting to stress. Skeptics point out that many ghostly sensations, chills, feelings of being watched, sudden dizziness, can be caused by infrasound. These are low-frequency vibrations below the range of human hearing. They can be generated by old buildings, air systems, or even weather. Studies show infrasound can trigger anxiety, dread, and even visual hallucinations. But believers counter with this. Not all hauntings can be reduced to vibrations. Not all voices can be dismissed as noise. And not all shadows can be explained away. Why we keep coming back. So why, knowing all of this, do we keep exploring haunted hospitals? Why do documentaries, ghost tours, and urban explorers flock to places like Manteno, Bartonville, and Elgin? The answer may be both psychological and spiritual. Psychologically, we are drawn to fear. Horror movies, haunted houses, ghost stories. They give us the thrill of danger without the risk. Walking through an abandoned asylum lets us flirt with terror while still being safe enough to leave. But spiritually, these places call to something deeper. They make us wonder about life after death, about the human soul, about whether suffering truly ends when the body does. Haunted hospitals force us to confront our biggest questions. What happens when we die? Do we linger? Can pain outlast life itself? Bridging the two worlds. Maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Maybe the psychology of fear and the reality of the paranormal are two sides of the same coin. Fear primes our brains to notice shadows and whispers. Trauma imprints itself onto buildings. And sometimes, just sometimes, those shadows and whispers aren't only in our heads. Because if even one story from Manteno, Bartonville, Elgin, Jacksonville, or Lincoln is true, if even one voice, one shadow, one sobbing figure is real, then it changes everything. It means death is not the end. It means hospitals aren't just places for the living. They are places where the dead gather, waiting, remembering, and sometimes still reaching out. And so we stand at the threshold. We've studied the science, felt the fear, and considered the spirits. But one final question remains. What does it mean for us? Because Illinois' haunted hospitals aren't just about history or ghosts. They're mirrors, forcing us to look inward, to confront our fears, our mortality, and the possibility that the veil between life and death is far thinner than we imagine. And that's where we'll end our journey. In the conclusion, where one last chilling story ties everything together, and where you'll be left wondering if you truly want to sleep with the lights off tonight. And now, Vanguard Vault family, we've come full circle. From Manteno's restless shadows to Bartonville's weeping gravedigger, from Elgin's tunnels to the cries of Lincoln's forgotten children, we've walked together through some of Illinois' darkest corners. But here's the truth. These hospitals are not just ruins. They are living graveyards. Every hallway still remembers. Every cracked window still watches. Every echo in the silence might be more than your imagination. One final story. Before we close, let me leave you with one last story. A few years ago, a group of explorers entered the old grounds of Manteno State Hospital. They had heard the legends, but they were skeptics, convinced they'd find nothing more than dust and graffiti. As they reached one of the long, empty wards, they decided to test their nerves. One of them shouted into the darkness, "Is anyone here with us?" At first, silence. Then, a faint sound. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, moving closer. They laughed nervously, telling themselves it was just the building settling. But the footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right behind them. One of the explorers turned, flashlight cutting across the hallway, and froze. Standing in the beam of light was a man in a hospital gown. Pale skin, hollow eyes. His lips moved, whispering something none of them could hear. In an instant, the figure vanished. The ward was empty again. The explorers fled, not stopping until they were outside in the cold night air. Later, reviewing their audio, they heard a voice, soft, raspy, whispering a single word, their name. What do we make of this? Maybe it was a trick of fear, maybe it was real, but either way, that moment forced those explorers, and now us, to ask the ultimate question. Does death really mean escape? Or can the traumas of life follow us into eternity? These hospitals stand as reminders that we cannot always separate the living from the dead, the past from the present. They are scars on Illinois' history, and maybe doorways into something far stranger. Your turn, Vanguard Vault family. So now I'll turn the question over to you. Would you spend a night in one of these hospitals, Manteno, Bartonville, Elgin, Jacksonville, or Lincoln, completely alone, in the dark? Or would you keep your distance, letting the ghosts of Illinois remain undisturbed? And here is something I want from you in the comments below. Tell me where you're rewatching from, and what time it is right now. Are you watching this at midnight with the lights off? At 3 a.m. when the world is silent? Or maybe during the day, thinking you're safe from the shadows? Because the truth is, time doesn't matter. Day or night, safe or not, the walls of these hospitals have seen too much to stay quiet. By now, you've heard the screams, walked the halls, and stared into the darkness of Illinois' haunted hospitals. And whether you believe these are echoes of trauma, tricks of the mind, or restless spirits, one thing is certain: these places are not empty. So tonight, when you turn off this video, I want you to listen closely. Listen to the silence in your own home. Listen for the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of air through the vents, the faint shuffle of footsteps where no one should be walking. Because the ghosts of Illinois may not stay in Illinois. Sometimes, when you invite the story in, the story follows you home. If you've made it this far, thank you for being part of the Vanguard Vault family. Make sure you hit that like button if this journey chilled you, subscribe for more deep dives into history's darkest corners, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next haunting. But most importantly, drop your thoughts below. Would you dare to spend a night in Montano or Bartonville? Which story shook you the most? And where in the world are you watching from right now? I'll be reading through the comments, and I can't wait to see your answers. Until next time, check your lights, listen to the silence, and remember, the dead don't always stay buried. Pennsylvania, a state drenched in history, shadowed by tragedy, and haunted by restless spirits. Behind the brick walls of decaying hospitals and the iron gates of asylums, whispers of pain and despair still linger. Some say the patients never truly left, their cries etched into the peeling paint, their shadows roaming the halls at night. Today, Vanguard Vault and its audience will journey into the darkness of 15 of the most haunted hospitals in Pennsylvania. From abandoned psychiatric wards to forgotten sanatoriums, each one carries its own terrifying story, echoes of suffering, legends of hauntings, and encounters that defy explanation. Stay with us until the very end, because the final hospital on this list, our number 1, is said to be so haunted that even seasoned investigators fear stepping inside. Let's begin our descent into the haunted hospitals of Pennsylvania. Number 15, Nanticoke State Hospital. Our countdown begins in Luzerne County, home to the long-forgotten Nanticoke State Hospital. Once a functioning medical center serving coal mining families of northeastern Pennsylvania, the hospital became a place where countless lives ended in the 20th century. Its basement morgue saw more bodies than anyone could count, and whispers suggest not all of them found peace. Locals claim that after its closure, the building didn't go quiet. Trespassers have reported the sounds of hospital beds squeaking through empty wards and disembodied voices calling their names. Some even describe cold spots so intense they felt like walking into a freezer. One chilling story tells of a group of urban explorers who dared to enter after midnight. As they descended into the basement, one of them swore he saw a pale figure in a nurse's uniform standing at the end of the corridor. But when they turned on their flashlights, there was nothing there, just peeling paint and the overwhelming stench of mold. EVP sessions in the old hospital have captured strange audio, moans, cries, and what one investigator insists was a faint voice whispering the word, "Help." Whether these spirits belong to patients, nurses, or simply echoes of the suffering once endured here, Nanticoke State Hospital has earned its reputation as one of Pennsylvania's eeriest abandoned wards. Number 14, Harrisburg State Hospital. At number 14, we travel to the state capital itself, Harrisburg, home to one of the oldest psychiatric institutions in the country, Harrisburg State Hospital. Opened in 1851, this massive asylum was originally called the Pennsylvania State Lunatic Hospital. It was designed as a model of compassionate care, but what unfolded over its 150-year history was far from gentle. The hospital became notorious for overcrowding, inhumane treatments, and forgotten patients. Some never saw the outside world again. Electroshock therapy, solitary confinement, and questionable experiments left deep scars on those who lived and died within its walls. Even after it closed in 2006, staff and visitors reported paranormal activity. Strange shadows moving across the old patient wards, doors opening on their own, and sudden waves of despair that seemed to wash over anyone who lingered too long. Ghost hunters who have entered Harrisburg State Hospital describe hearing screams echoing through empty hallways. Others claim to have seen fleeting apparitions, patients in outdated hospital gowns staring from windows before vanishing into thin air. One urban explorer captured something chilling on camera. As his group walked through the abandoned chapel, a loud bang echoed behind them. When they played back their recorder later, A deep male voice could be heard saying, "Get out." Whether these spirits are lost patients trapped in their suffering, or simply imprints of the institution's grim past, Harrisburg State Hospital remains one of Pennsylvania's most chilling relics, a place where the line between history and haunting blurs. Number 13. Scranton State General Hospital. Scranton, Pennsylvania, best known for its coal mining roots and industrial history, is also home to a hospital that many locals would rather forget. Scranton State General Hospital, which operated during the mid-20th century, was meant to serve the working-class families of the area. For decades, it treated mining accidents, outbreaks of disease, and the countless injuries that came with the region's dangerous industries. But behind its sterile white walls, the hospital accumulated a grim reputation. Former patients whispered about unexplainable deaths and nurses who would vanish from employment records without explanation. Though officially closed, its abandoned structure has stood as a decaying reminder of medicine's darker past. Urban explorers who have dared to step inside describe the suffocating atmosphere. Rusting beds line the corridors, medical charts scattered across the floors, and graffiti marking walls where surgical equipment once gleamed. Yet it's not just the decay that unnerves them. Some claim to hear faint coughing in empty rooms, or hurried footsteps on stairwells where no one stands. One chilling account tells of a group of friends exploring the hospital at night. As they reached what was once the operating theater, one of them felt a sharp tug on their jacket, like someone pulling them back from the doorway. When they turned, the hallway was empty. But another explorer swore he saw a shadow dart across the floor, low and fast, disappearing into a locked storage closet. EVP recordings captured here are among the most disturbing in the region. Investigators claim to have heard voices whispering medical terms, scalpel, blood, even cut, as though long-dead surgeons were still at work. Whether these are intelligent hauntings or simply echoes of a troubled past, Scranton State General Hospital remains one of Pennsylvania's most unnerving relics of medical history. Number 12. Allentown State Hospital. Allentown State Hospital, opened in 1912, was once heralded as a modern psychiatric facility. It operated for nearly a century, closing its doors for good in 2010. During its years of service, the hospital became home to thousands of patients, many forgotten by families and lost to history. At its peak, the institution was sprawling, with red brick buildings connected by a web of tunnels. What was meant to be a place of care too often became a place of neglect. Former employees have spoken of overcrowded wards, treatments that bordered on cruel, and patients left to wander the halls aimlessly, their cries echoing long into the night. When the hospital finally shut down, it didn't fall silent. Paranormal investigators flocked to the property, and many reported eerie phenomena. One of the most common experiences was the sound of footsteps pacing in deserted hallways. Others described sudden drops in temperature, as though someone invisible had entered the room. Local legend tells of a nurse named Margaret, who supposedly died on duty in the 1940s. Visitors claim to see her shadow drifting past windows, and some say she still checks on patients, even though the wards are empty. A group of ghost hunters recorded what they believed to be her voice on tape. The soft but urgent words, "I will take care of you." There are also accounts of violent encounters. A security guard, making his rounds late one night, reported being shoved so hard in the back that he fell forward onto the floor. When he spun around, no one was there. The incident left him shaken, and he refused to continue working the night shift alone. The tunnels beneath Allentown State Hospital are particularly infamous. Dark, narrow, and stretching for miles, they were once used to transport patients discreetly between buildings. Today, they are said to be hotspots of activity. Some explorers claim to hear whispers that seem to follow them through the tunnels, always just out of reach. Others describe seeing pale figures at the very edge of their flashlight beams, only for the apparitions to vanish when approached. Despite its closure, the legacy of Allentown State Hospital endures. It represents not only a chapter of psychiatric history, but also a place where many believe the spirits of the forgotten still linger, restless and waiting to be acknowledged. For those brave enough to enter, the experience is unforgettable, and often terrifying. With Scranton State General and Allentown State Hospital, our journey through Pennsylvania's haunted institutions deepens. Each of these places is a monument to both human suffering and the mysteries that linger after death. But as we move further into our list, the stories will grow even darker. Hospitals where cruelty was routine, and where the ghosts seem far less willing to rest. Number 11. St. Joseph's Hospital, Lancaster. In the heart of Lancaster, a city known for its quaint Amish farmlands and deep history, sits the former St. Joseph's Hospital. Unlike the massive state-run asylums, this was a Catholic institution founded in the late 1800s by the Sisters of St. Francis. On the surface, it was a place of healing and mercy. But behind its heavy stone walls, stories of pain and unexplainable hauntings have persisted for decades. St. Joseph's cared for generations of Lancaster residents, farmers, factory workers, and families who relied on the nuns and doctors for everything from childbirth to emergency surgery. But medicine was far more primitive in those early years. Mortality rates were high, and countless patients never walked out of its wards alive. Entire wings were said to have the scent of death, particularly during influenza outbreaks and the polio epidemic. When the hospital expanded in the early 20th century, workers unearthed strange bones during excavation, believed by some to belong to victims of earlier epidemics hastily buried near the grounds. Whether or not this is true, the lore stuck, and whispers began about the hospital being cursed. Former staff members recall strange experiences even when the hospital was fully operational. Nurses reported seeing figures in outdated clothing walking the halls. Others would hear the sound of rosary beads clicking, only to find no one there. Patients spoke of a tall nun who would appear at their bedside silently praying before vanishing without a word. After parts of the facility closed, investigators began to explore. Recordings from the old surgical wing captured chilling whispers in Latin, phrases often associated with Catholic prayer but spoken in voices no one present could identify. In one documented case, an investigator asked, "Who's here with us?" The reply on playback was a harsh whispered word, "Sister." There are also darker accounts. Some believe that restless spirits in St. Joseph's are not benevolent caretakers but the angry remnants of patients who suffered without relief. Cold drafts, objects moving on their own, and sudden nausea are commonly reported by those who dare to step inside the now abandoned sections. St. Joseph's Hospital remains a paradox, founded on compassion and faith, yet remembered as a site of eerie encounters and restless spirits. It is a place where the line between sanctuary and spectral presence seems impossibly thin. Number 10. Byberry State Hospital, Philadelphia State Hospital. If there is one hospital in Pennsylvania that has become infamous not just for hauntings but for outright horror, it is Byberry State Hospital, officially known as the Philadelphia State Hospital at Byberry. Opened in 1907, Byberry was initially intended as a progressive psychiatric facility. But what unfolded over the decades is a dark stain on Pennsylvania's history. By the 1960s and 70s, Byberry had become notorious for severe overcrowding, neglect, and inhumane treatment. Patients were crammed into filthy wards, left without clothing, and subjected to brutal restraints. Stories of violence, abuse, and hopelessness became so widespread that the hospital was investigated multiple times before finally shutting down in 1990. The physical building itself, left to decay for years, looked like something out of a nightmare. Hallways stretched endlessly, lined with peeling paint, shattered windows, and rusting gurneys. Graffiti-covered walls that once contained patients who had nowhere else to go. But even worse than its appearance were the stories told by those who entered after its closure. Urban explorers and thrill-seekers called Byberry one of the scariest places in America. Visitors reported hearing blood-curdling screams echoing through the hallways, as though the walls themselves remembered the agony. Others described being physically touched, scratched, or shoved by unseen hands. One of the most persistent legends involves a shadowy figure nicknamed the Man in the Corners. Countless witnesses have claimed to see a tall, dark silhouette lurking at the very edges of their vision, always watching, never approaching, but filling them with overwhelming dread. Another chilling tale comes from a group of amateur ghost hunters who entered the facility in the late 1990s. As they reached a large ward on the top floor, their flashlights flickered out simultaneously. In the pitch dark, one of them felt a hand clamp onto his shoulder. When the lights returned seconds later, No one was there. He left the building in tears and refused to ever return. EVP evidence collected from Byberry is among the most disturbing in Pennsylvania. Recordings feature screams, moans, and once even the words "Don't leave me," captured in a trembling voice. Paranormal teams who reviewed the tapes were shaken, with some refusing to release the full audio publicly because of how unsettling it was. Even police officers who patrolled the grounds after its closure admitted that Byberry terrified them. One officer recalled hearing the sound of dragging footsteps behind him, though he was completely alone. When he turned, he saw what looked like a shadow crawling across the floor before it vanished into the wall. Byberry is not simply remembered as a haunted location. It is infamous as a place of real suffering, where human dignity was lost. Whether the spirits that remain are the restless dead, the echoes of abuse, or something darker, Byberry State Hospital is considered one of the most terrifying haunted institutions, not only in Pennsylvania but in the entire United States. With St. Joseph's Hospital in Lancaster and Byberry State Hospital in Philadelphia, we've stepped firmly into the realm of Pennsylvania's darkest medical history. One rooted in faith and tragedy, the other in cruelty and scandal. Both stand as reminders that not every patient finds peace, and not every hospital leaves the past behind. But the deeper we go into this list, the more intense the hauntings become. Ahead lie hospitals and asylums with legends so terrifying they've drawn ghost hunters from across the nation. And soon we'll reach Penhurst, Mayview, and the #1 haunted hospital in Pennsylvania. Places so infamous that even speaking their names can send shivers down the spine. No. 9. Norristown State Hospital. Not far from Philadelphia in Montgomery County stands one of the largest psychiatric facilities ever built in Pennsylvania, Norristown State Hospital. Opened in 1880, it was intended to relieve the overcrowding at other asylums and to provide a more humane form of treatment. For a time, it was considered a model institution, pioneering new approaches in mental health. But as the decades wore on, Norristown's reputation shifted from hopeful to horrifying. At its peak, the hospital housed more than 5,000 patients. Overcrowding became severe, and treatments often bordered on barbaric. Electroshock therapy, heavy restraints, and crude surgical procedures were commonplace. Patients who had little chance of recovery were often confined for decades, forgotten by their families and by the outside world. The grounds themselves are sprawling, with dozens of brick buildings spread across hundreds of acres. Much of it has fallen into disuse, but the structures still stand, silent, hulking reminders of the suffering that once filled their halls. And according to countless witnesses, not all the suffering has faded away. Security staff who patrolled the grounds after its partial closure reported strange phenomena. They would hear doors slamming in locked wards, or footsteps pacing above them in floors that were completely unoccupied. Lights flickered on in buildings without electricity, and cold drafts swept through rooms in the dead of summer. Paranormal investigators who entered Norristown have gathered chilling evidence. One EVP session captured what sounded like a woman sobbing, followed by a faint voice saying, "Please, let me go." Others claim to have seen apparitions of nurses in old-fashioned uniforms, moving purposefully through the halls before vanishing. But perhaps the most disturbing accounts come from the hospital's abandoned forensic unit. This section once housed some of the most dangerous and violent patients, individuals committed for crimes but deemed unfit to stand trial. Today, investigators describe an overwhelming sense of dread in these wards. Shadows dart across the walls, and loud bangs echo down the corridors as though something is slamming against the doors. One legend tells of a patient who died violently in the forensic unit during the 1950s. His ghost is said to linger, filled with rage. Some explorers swear they've been shoved or scratched in this area, and at least one investigator left with deep claw marks across his arm after a night inside. Norristown State Hospital is still partially active today, though much of it lies abandoned. The contrast between the functioning modern wards and the decaying haunted remnants is unsettling, an institution divided between the living and the dead. And for those who dare to enter its forgotten wings, the echoes of despair are said to be almost unbearable. No. 8. Conemaugh Memorial Hospital, Johnstown. Moving westward to Johnstown, Pennsylvania, We find a hospital that is not abandoned but still very much in operation, Conemaugh Memorial Hospital. Unlike the crumbling asylums and decayed state hospitals on our list, Conemaugh is a modern medical center. Yet its history and its hauntings have earned it a place among Pennsylvania's most haunted hospitals. The city of Johnstown is infamous for tragedy, most notably the Johnstown flood of 1889, which killed more than 2,200 people. Conemaugh Memorial's earliest predecessor was overwhelmed with victims, and for weeks after the disaster, its wards overflowed with the dead and the dying. The sheer volume of suffering left an indelible mark on the site, one that many believe persists to this day. Over the decades, patients and staff alike have reported paranormal encounters inside the hospital. One of the most common stories involves the ghost of a little girl, seen wandering the pediatric wing. Nurses describe hearing the sound of a child laughing in the middle of the night, only to find the hallways empty. Others have seen a young figure dart into patient rooms, but when they check, there is no one there. Another frequently told tale is that of a mysterious woman in white. Staff members claim she appears in rooms where patients are close to death, sometimes standing quietly at the bedside. Some interpret her as a comforting figure, a kind of spectral nurse guiding souls into the afterlife. But others say her presence is deeply unsettling, as if she is a harbinger of death. Doctors working late shifts have reported hearing footsteps behind them in deserted corridors. Elevators move between floors without being called, and lights flicker in areas where maintenance teams insist there are no electrical faults. Some staff members avoid certain sections of the hospital altogether, convinced that the atmosphere there is simply too heavy. Perhaps the most chilling stories involve the basement levels of Conemaugh. These service areas, far removed from the patient wards, are said to be filled with strange activity. Security guards making rounds have heard whispers following them through the darkened halls, and some have seen shadowy figures dart past their flashlights. One guard reported seeing a man in outdated clothing standing near a storage room door. When he approached, the figure turned, revealing a pale, almost skeletal face, before disappearing into thin air. The guard was so shaken that he requested reassignment and refused to return to the basement alone. Despite being an active hospital, Conemaugh Memorial's ghost stories continue to circulate among staff, patients, and visitors. Some see the activity as a sign of the immense history and tragedy the hospital has absorbed over the decades. Others believe it's the restless energy of thousands of souls who pass through its wards, unwilling or unable to move on. Conemaugh is a reminder that a hospital doesn't need to be abandoned to be haunted. Sometimes the past lingers side by side with the present, visible only to those who happen to glance into the shadows. With Norristown State Hospital's sprawling decayed grounds and Conemaugh Memorial's living hauntings, we see two very different sides of Pennsylvania's haunted medical history. One is a relic of the Asylum era, where cruelty and despair left scars that still echo. The other is a functioning hospital, where spirits seem to coexist with doctors, nurses, and patients in the present day. As we move deeper into this list, the stories only grow more chilling. Next, we'll enter Altoona Hospital, a place with a reputation for restless spirits and Weston's connections to Pennsylvania's ghostly legends. And soon after that, we'll arrive at Dixmont, Danville, Pennhurst, and the final most terrifying entries in our countdown. Number 7. Altoona Hospital. Altoona. Altoona is a city defined by its railroads and industry, a place where thousands of workers passed through during Pennsylvania's manufacturing boom. At the center of it all stood Altoona Hospital, established in the late 1800s to care for the workers, their families, and the countless injuries that came with the industrial age. Though it grew into a modern medical center over the decades, the hospital developed a reputation for strange activity and spectral encounters. Many staff members have admitted to seeing or hearing things that defy explanation, especially in the older sections of the building before renovations began to modernize it. One of the most well-known stories involves the spirit of a nurse said to haunt the upper floors. Known to some as the Lady in White, she is described as wearing an old-fashioned uniform, her face calm and expressionless. Nurses and patients alike have reported seeing her standing silently at the foot of beds, often during moments of crisis. For some, her appearance is comforting, as if she is still caring for patients long after her death, but others find her presence chilling. describing an overwhelming sense of sadness whenever she appears. There are also reports of children's voices echoing through the hospital corridors, even when no children are present. Several night shift workers claim to hear laughter and footsteps racing past them in the pediatric ward, only to find the wing completely empty. Some even reported toys moving on their own or rolling across the floor as though pushed by invisible hands. Doctors working overnight in the emergency department have told of strange occurrences too. Monitors suddenly spike with abnormal readings before returning to normal, as if an unseen presence is interfering. Others describe the sense of being watched while walking through the older parts of the hospital. The basement of Altoona Hospital is particularly notorious. Used for storage, it contains long hallways filled with outdated equipment and forgotten furniture. Security staff doing their rounds often dread this part of the building, reporting whispers that seem to echo just behind them, and shadows that slip across the walls. One guard told the story of hearing what sounded like a gurney being wheeled down the hall. When he turned the corner to confront whoever was there, the corridor was completely empty, but the sound of squeaking wheels continued, slowly fading into silence. Although Altoona Hospital has undergone extensive renovations and expansions, the stories persist. It remains a place where history and the present overlap, where those who dedicate their lives to saving others sometimes come face to face with the mysteries of death. In Altoona, medicine and the paranormal seem forever intertwined. Number 6. Weston State Hospital. Border case. Our next entry technically lies across the state border in West Virginia, but its reputation has spilled so deeply into Pennsylvania folklore that it has become a part of the region's ghostly landscape. This is the Weston State Hospital, better known as the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. Built in the mid-1800s, Weston was intended to be a model of compassionate psychiatric care. The massive stone structure was designed to house just 250 patients, each with space and sunlight to promote healing. But as with so many institutions of its era, the reality became far darker. By the 1950s, the hospital held nearly 2,500 patients, 10 times its intended capacity. Conditions were horrific. Overcrowding, abuse, and neglect turned the asylum into a living nightmare. Patients were subjected to outdated treatments, including ice baths, electroshock therapy, and in some cases, lobotomies. Many never left the grounds, their lives ending in loneliness and despair. With so much suffering contained within its walls, it is no wonder Weston has become one of the most famous haunted hospitals in America. For Pennsylvanians living near the border, Weston's reputation spread quickly. Paranormal investigators from Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and across the state have made pilgrimages to the asylum, documenting chilling encounters. Reports of apparitions are countless. Shadows flitting down long corridors, full-bodied figures appearing in patient rooms, and the infamous ghost of Civil War soldiers, said to still patrol the grounds where the asylum was first built. One of the asylum's most notorious spirits is known as Lily, a young girl who supposedly died on the premises. Investigators bring toys to her former room, and many claim the toys will move on their own. Balls roll across the floor, music boxes play without being wound, and EVP recordings capture the giggles of a child. Skeptics dismiss these claims, but seasoned ghost hunters often describe Lily's presence as one of the most consistent hauntings at Weston. Other areas are far darker. The old surgical ward is said to be haunted by patients who underwent lobotomies. Visitors describe overwhelming dread, sudden headaches, and in some cases, collapsing to the floor as though struck by unseen forces. In the violent ward, investigators have recorded growls and screams that defy explanation. Weston State Hospital has become a centerpiece of paranormal tourism, with overnight ghost hunts and guided tours drawing thousands each year. Its size and intensity make it one of the most terrifying institutions still standing in America. And while it may sit just beyond Pennsylvania's state line, its legends and hauntings have become part of Pennsylvania's haunted folklore. Many in the Keystone State consider it just as much a part of their paranormal landscape as Pennhurst or Byberry. Whether you see it as a borderland curiosity or an extension of Pennsylvania's asylum history, Weston's reputation is undeniable. It is a place where history, tragedy, and hauntings collide. and its echoes reach well into the heart of Pennsylvania's ghost stories. With Altoona Hospital's restless spirits and Weston's towering presence spilling into Pennsylvania lore, we've reached the midpoint of our countdown. Each step brings us deeper into the heart of the state's most terrifying medical institutions. Ahead lies Dixmont State Hospital, perched on its hillside like a crumbling tomb, and Danville, where tragedy and paranormal legend converge. And soon, we will reach Penhurst, Mayview, and our #1 entry, hospitals so infamous that even seasoned investigators hesitate to speak of them too lightly. Number 5. Dixmont State Hospital, Killbuck Township. On a quiet hillside overlooking the Ohio River in Killbuck Township once stood one of the most infamous psychiatric hospitals in Pennsylvania, Dixmont State Hospital. Opened in 1862, it was originally called the Department of the Insane of the Western Pennsylvania Hospital of Pittsburgh. For over a century, it housed thousands of patients, many of whom were forgotten by their families and left to languish in overcrowded, crumbling wards. Dixmont was part of a movement to provide care for the mentally ill in large, self-contained institutions. Like its counterparts across the state, it was intended as a place of healing. But the reality became one of misery. Reports of overcrowding, poor sanitation, and mistreatment became common as the decades passed. By the 1970s, Dixmont was a place of despair, with stories of neglect so severe that patients wandered the grounds unsupervised. The hospital finally closed in 1984, but its dark reputation only grew in the years that followed. The massive complex of Gothic buildings became a magnet for urban explorers, thrill seekers, and paranormal investigators. Many claimed Dixmont was one of the most haunted places in western Pennsylvania. Explorers described hearing disembodied screams echoing across the empty halls, particularly near the old surgical wing. Others told of footsteps following them through the wards, only to turn and find no one there. One chilling legend involves the so-called Screaming Hall. According to countless visitors, this hallway seemed to carry the sounds of anguish, moans, cries, and at times, full-bodied screams that reverberated through the air. EVP recordings from Dixmont revealed disturbing whispers, some of which investigators believed to be in German, reflecting the heritage of many early patients. Others picked up chilling phrases like "don't go" and "stay with us." Shadow figures were another common report. Visitors often described seeing dark shapes dart across doorways, some crouching low to the ground, others looming tall in the corners of rooms. A few explorers swore they were physically touched, shoved, or scratched while inside the hospital. The site gained national attention when Walmart purchased the land in the mid-2000s with plans to build a supercenter. During demolition, workers complained of strange phenomena. Tools went missing, heavy equipment malfunctioned without explanation, and several reported seeing shadowy figures moving in the ruins at night. Local lore even suggests that the demolition triggered increased paranormal activity, as if disturbing the hospital's remains unleashed whatever spirits had been trapped there. Today, Dixmont no longer stands. The buildings were demolished, and the land remains largely undeveloped due to structural issues. But for decades, it was considered one of the most haunted institutions in Pennsylvania. Those who dared to enter remember it as a place where the cries of the forgotten still lingered long after the hospital's final patient was gone. Number 4. Danville State Hospital, Danville. On the banks of the Susquehanna River lies another of Pennsylvania's historic psychiatric institutions, Danville State Hospital. Unlike many on this list, Danville is still an active facility today, though much of its original structure and grounds carry a legacy of tragedy and haunting. Opened in 1869, Danville was one of the state's first major asylums, built to house hundreds of patients in a sprawling, self-sufficient complex. But from the very beginning, the hospital was marked by disaster. In 1881, a massive fire swept through the building, killing at least 6 patients and destroying much of the original structure. Rebuilt in the following years, the hospital continued to operate, eventually housing thousands of patients at its peak. Like other state hospitals of the era, Danville suffered from overcrowding and outdated treatments. Electroshock therapy, hydrotherapy, and heavy sedation were common. Many patients never left the grounds, and a large cemetery nearby holds the graves of those who died within its walls, most marked only by numbers, their names lost to history. These unmarked graves have become a focal point of Danville's ghost stories. Locals who visit the cemetery report feeling watched, hearing whispers among the headstones, and seeing strange lights flickering at night. Some claim that shadowy figures drift among the graves, vanishing when approached. Inside the hospital itself, paranormal reports are just as chilling. Staff and visitors describe hearing screams in empty wards, doors slamming shut with violent force, and sudden drops in temperature. Some employees refuse to enter certain wings alone, convinced that they are not alone even when the rooms are visibly empty. One particularly disturbing story involves the hospital's tunnels, an underground network used to transport patients and supplies. Investigators who have explored these tunnels report hearing footsteps following them, even though the passages were sealed off to the public. Others captured EVPs of voices crying out, "Help me," or "Don't leave." Apparitions have also been reported throughout the hospital. Nurses in outdated uniforms, patients wandering aimlessly, and a mysterious male figure often described as tall, thin, and wearing a dark suit. Some believe he may have been a doctor who worked at Danville during its earliest years, continuing his rounds even in death. Perhaps the most unsettling legend tied to Danville is that of the Burning Woman. Said to be the spirit of a patient who perished in the 1881 fire, she reportedly appears as a shadowy figure with glowing embers for eyes. Witnesses describe smelling smoke moments before she appears, and some have even claimed to feel their skin grow hot, as though standing near open flames. Though Danville remains operational, its haunted reputation has made it a frequent subject of paranormal investigations. For many, it stands as a reminder that the tragedies of the past, fires, forgotten patients, unmarked graves, still echo in the present. Whether you believe the spirits of the lost still linger, or that the hospital simply carries the energy of its dark history, Danville State Hospital is undeniably one of Pennsylvania's most haunted asylums. With Dixmont's crumbling halls and Danville's fiery legacy, we are nearing the most infamous entries on our list. These final three hospitals, Pennhurst, Mayview, and Western Torrance, are not just haunted locations. They are legends, names spoken in hushed tones even among veteran ghost hunters. Each has a history so dark, so tragic that the hauntings seem almost inevitable, and the stories tied to them are far more terrifying than anything we've heard so far. Number 3. Pennhurst State School and Hospital, Spring City. No list of haunted hospitals in Pennsylvania would be complete without Pennhurst State School and Hospital. Though technically designed as both a hospital and institution for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, its history is one of the darkest in the state, and its hauntings are among the most terrifying. Pennhurst opened in 1908 as the Eastern State Institution for the Feeble-Minded and Epileptic. Like many such facilities of the time, it was intended to provide care, education, and treatment. But within just a few decades, it became a symbol of abuse, neglect, and institutional horror. By the mid-20th century, Pennhurst was grossly overcrowded, housing more than 3,500 patients in conditions described by journalists and investigators as inhumane. Exposés in the 1960s and 70s revealed shocking abuses. Patients were tied to beds, left in soiled clothing, and subjected to brutal punishments for minor infractions. Many children lived in barren rooms with little stimulation, rocking back and forth in silence. It was a place of suffering that scarred generations of families across Pennsylvania. The facility finally closed in 1987 after court rulings deemed the conditions a violation of patients' rights. But while the hospital ceased operations, the echoes of its tortured past seemed to remain behind. Pennhurst quickly gained a reputation as one of the most haunted sites in America. Paranormal investigators who visit the sprawling complex of crumbling buildings report an overwhelming sense of dread. EVPs captured throughout the site reveal chilling voices, pleas for help, angry cries, and even what sound like children screaming. Investigators have heard heavy footsteps in empty halls, doors slamming shut, and wheelchairs rolling on their own. One of the most infamous haunted spots is the underground tunnel system. Used to connect various buildings, the tunnels are pitch black and suffocating. Visitors describe being followed by unseen footsteps and sometimes even feeling hands brush against them in the dark. Some refuse to enter after hearing screams echo through the passageways. Full-bodied apparitions are also common at Pennhurst. Investigators have reported seeing nurses in outdated uniforms, doctors pacing the halls, and patients lingering in corners. One recurring figure is that of a small boy who appears in the Quaker building, often described as reaching out as if seeking comfort. Penhurst's reputation has been cemented by appearances on countless paranormal television shows, documentaries, and live investigations. Ghost Adventures, Paranormal State, and others have all captured chilling evidence within its walls. For many, Penhurst is not just haunted, it is cursed by the atrocities committed there. Today, part of the grounds has been repurposed into a haunted attraction during Halloween season. But even those who work the events admit the hauntings are very real. Many actors and staff have reported being touched, pushed, or whispered to by something that was not part of the stage scares. Penhurst stands as both a historical scar and a paranormal hotspot. Its combination of documented abuse, tragic suffering, and eerie paranormal phenomena make it one of the scariest hospitals not only in Pennsylvania, but in the entire United States. Number 2. Mayview State Hospital, Pittsburgh. Just outside Pittsburgh lies the sprawling grounds of Mayview State Hospital, another psychiatric institution with a grim reputation. Opened in 1893, Mayview was designed to relieve the overcrowding of other hospitals like Dixmont. Built on nearly 400 acres of rolling hills, the hospital once housed thousands of patients in its massive red brick buildings. For decades, Mayview was a self-contained community, with its own farms, workshops, and recreational facilities. But behind the facade of order, reports of neglect and mistreatment were common. As with many institutions of the era, patients were subjected to harsh treatments, and overcrowding turned once spacious wards into prisons of despair. By the mid-20th century, Mayview was one of the largest hospitals in western Pennsylvania, but it was also one of the most infamous. Stories circulated of violent patients locked away in isolation, experimental treatments gone wrong, and staff who used excessive force to control those under their care. When the hospital finally closed in 2008, urban explorers flocked to the site. What they found were vast, decaying corridors filled with rusting beds, broken wheelchairs, and peeling paint. The air itself seemed heavy with sorrow. Many who entered described an immediate sense of unease, as though hundreds of unseen eyes were watching them. Haunting reports from Mayview are as chilling as they are numerous. Explorers have described hearing screams echoing through the halls, even when the building was completely empty. Others reported the sound of footsteps running toward them, only for the hallways to remain deserted. One of the most unsettling legends involves the Shadow Man of Mayview. Dozens of witnesses claim to have seen a towering, dark figure that lurks in the basement and mechanical areas. Unlike typical shadow figures, this entity is described as massive, with glowing red eyes. Some believe it may not be the spirit of a human at all, but something darker, an entity born of the pain and suffering that once permeated Mayview's halls. Another hotspot of activity is the hospital's abandoned children's ward. Visitors have reported hearing laughter, the squeak of toys, and the faint sound of lullabies playing on old intercom systems that no longer function. A few explorers captured recordings of what sounded like a child whispering, "Play with me." The hospital's sprawling tunnels also add to its terrifying reputation. Used to transport patients, laundry, and supplies, the tunnels stretch beneath the property like arteries of the forgotten institution. Explorers often describe hearing whispers in the dark, or the sound of something dragging across the concrete floors. Even the grounds outside the hospital carry an aura of haunting. Former staff have reported seeing figures wandering the fields at night, only to vanish when approached. Some say the spirits of patients who died at Mayview are not confined to the buildings, but roam the land freely. Though Mayview was demolished in 2012, its legend endures. Paranormal investigators still speak of it as one of the most haunted hospitals in Pennsylvania, second only to the institution that claims the top spot on our list. The memories of its patients and the horrors of its history continue to echo long after its walls were reduced to rubble. With Penhurst's legacy of cruelty in Mayview's towering presence over Pittsburgh's hills, we stand on the threshold of the final chapter. Ahead lies the #1 haunted hospital in Pennsylvania, a place so steeped in tragedy, so drenched in paranormal legend, that it eclipses them all. Prepare yourself, because the story of our final entry is the most terrifying yet. Number 1. Torrance State Hospital, Torrance. Our journey through Pennsylvania's most haunted hospitals brings us at last to Torrance State Hospital, a sprawling psychiatric institution that remains active to this day. Nestled in Westmoreland County, this facility has earned a reputation not only as one of the most haunted hospitals in Pennsylvania, but as one of the darkest and most mysterious psychiatric institutions in America. Torrance opened in 1919 as a psychiatric hospital intended to alleviate the overcrowding plaguing facilities like Dixmont and Danville. From the outside, its red brick buildings and expansive campus resembled a small town. Patients worked on farms, in kitchens, and in workshops, all designed to make the hospital self-sufficient. But as the decades passed, Torrance fell victim to the same issues that haunted nearly every large psychiatric institution of its era: overcrowding, controversial treatments, and stories of neglect. By the mid-20th century, Torrance was notorious for its experimental treatments. Electroshock therapy, insulin coma therapy, and heavy doses of psychiatric drugs were all employed. Lobotomies, though officially banned by the 1950s, were rumored to have continued in secret for years. The hospital became a place where hope was often replaced by silence, and silence by suffering. But what truly sets Torrance apart, and what makes it number 1 on our list, is the overwhelming volume of paranormal activity reported by patients, staff, and investigators alike. Unlike many hospitals that were shuttered and left to rot, Torrance remains in operation, which makes the reports even more chilling. The spirits here are not confined to forgotten ruins. They move among the living. One of the most enduring legends of Torrance is that of the screaming ward. Nurses who worked the night shift claimed to hear agonizing cries coming from empty rooms. At first, they assumed patients were in distress, only to find the beds empty and undisturbed. The screams would rise and fall like waves, sometimes lasting for hours. Even today, employees whisper about hearing disembodied voices echoing through certain wings, forcing some to avoid those areas altogether. Apparitions are also common. Staff describe seeing figures in hospital gowns wandering the halls, vanishing when approached. Others report encountering doctors in outdated uniforms, appearing solid and real until they fade into thin air. Several employees have quit after repeated sightings, claiming they could no longer work in an environment where the dead walked so openly among the living. Perhaps the most terrifying stories come from the hospital's underground tunnels. Like Danville and Mayview, Torrance's tunnels were used to transport patients and supplies discreetly. But many say these tunnels are home to a darkness unlike anywhere else on the property. Investigators have reported being shoved violently, scratched, and even choked by unseen forces while walking through the subterranean halls. EVPs captured in the tunnels often contain growls, screams, and chilling phrases like, "Get out," or "I'm still here." One former security guard described a night when he was making rounds through the tunnel system. He heard what sounded like dozens of footsteps marching toward him. He braced himself for a group of intruders, only to realize the tunnel was completely empty. The footsteps grew louder, surrounding him, before suddenly stopping all at once. He resigned the very next day. Patients themselves have also reported disturbing encounters. Some claim to see children playing in the corners of their rooms, vanishing when the lights come on. Others describe shadowy figures standing at the foot of their beds. In some cases, patients with no history of paranormal beliefs have described detailed apparitions that matched accounts from staff, despite having no way of knowing such stories existed. Another infamous legend tied to Torrance is the man in the elevator. Staff claim that in one of the older elevators, a figure sometimes appears standing silently in the corner. He is described as tall, gaunt, and dressed in a black suit. Witnesses say he never moves, never speaks, but simply watches. Those who have seen him describe overwhelming dread, often refusing to use the elevator again. The hospital grounds themselves also hold ghostly secrets. The nearby cemetery contains hundreds of unmarked graves, patients who died at Torrance with no family to claim them. Visitors report strange lights drifting among the headstones, and investigators have captured EVPs of voices calling out names, many of which match old hospital records. Some locals believe the restless dead still wander the grounds, seeking recognition for lives lost in obscurity. Even modern paranormal teams who pride themselves on skepticism admit Torrance is different. Investigators who entered the facility with recording equipment often leave with chilling evidence. Unexplained screams, shadows captured on film, and sudden malfunctions of cameras and batteries. Some refuse to return, claiming the energy of the place follows them home, manifesting in nightmares, whispers, and disturbances long after leaving the hospital. Torrance's status as an active hospital only heightens its mystery. Unlike abandoned ruins, this is a place where staff continue to work, patients continue to live, and yet, the stories of hauntings never cease. Nurses, doctors, and guards still whisper about the apparitions, the voices, and the footsteps. For many, Torrance represents the intersection of two worlds, the living and the dead, coexisting uneasily in the same space. What makes Torrance the #1 most haunted hospital in Pennsylvania is not just the volume of reports, but the intensity. These aren't isolated ghost stories told by thrill-seekers in empty ruins. They are ongoing experiences lived by those who walk the halls every day. Torrance is not just a relic of the past. It is a haunted institution in the present. So, as we close our countdown, remember this. In Pennsylvania, hospitals are not just places of healing. They are places where suffering leaves scars that time cannot erase, where history lingers in whispers and shadows. And nowhere is that more evident than at Torrance State Hospital, the place where the dead are said to walk beside the living, and where every scream, every shadow, every whisper reminds us that the line between the natural and the supernatural is thinner than we dare believe. You've just journeyed through the 15 most haunted hospitals in Pennsylvania, from forgotten asylums to crumbling wards, and finally to Torrance, the crown jewel of the state's paranormal legacy. Which of these stories gave you the biggest chills? Was it the cries echoing through Dixmont, the shadows of Penhurst, or the horrors still alive at Torrance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you crave more haunted history, don't forget to subscribe and explore the Haunted Creepiest Videos playlist, because each video hides its own dark secrets. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, some halls were never meant to be walked alone. Imagine this. The night is cold. The air feels heavier than usual, and you find yourself standing in front of an abandoned hospital. Its windows are shattered, its walls cracked and fading with time. The silence is almost unbearable until you hear it. A faint echo of footsteps, but you know you're the only one there. Hospitals have always had a strange effect on us. Even when they're full of life, bustling with doctors and nurses, there's an uneasy energy in the air. And once they're abandoned, they become something else entirely. Places where shadows seem to move on their own, and where whispers linger long after the last patient has gone. Let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered why hospitals, more than almost any other building, are said to be haunted? Is it because of the countless lives that ended within their walls? Or is it because our minds can separate the memories of sickness and pain from the place itself? And since you're already here with the Vanguard Vault family members on this journey, let's make this personal. Tell me in the comments right now, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? I love seeing the answers. Some of you are brave enough to watch these stories late at night, while others stick to daylight. Which one are you? Drop it below. I'll be reading the comments, and I'll even pin some of the most interesting ones, so don't be shy. Share your location, share the time. Let's see how far this haunted community reaches across the globe. And one more question before we dive in. Would you walk alone through a hospital basement at night if you had the chance? Yes or no? Be honest. I'm curious to see how many of you are thrill seekers, and how many of you wouldn't dare. If you're new here, welcome. This channel is where haunted history lives. If you love stories of abandoned hospitals, paranormal encounters, and chilling tales from the past, make sure to hit subscribe and join our growing community. Now, let's step inside together. Because tonight, we're uncovering the 15 most haunted hospitals in Michigan. And trust me, you should never visit these wards alone. When you think about hospitals today, you probably imagine clean white walls, modern machines beeping, and doctors rushing between rooms. But if we travel back just a century or two, hospitals were very different. Darker, colder, and in many cases far more dangerous than the diseases people came in with. Hospitals have always carried a strange duality. They are places of healing, but also of suffering. For every life saved, there are countless others that ended on the very same grounds. And it is this balance, this overlap of hope and despair, that many believe leaves behind something that never quite disappears. The mortality of old hospitals. Before modern medicine, entering a hospital was often like signing a silent contract with death. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, mortality rates in hospitals were shockingly high. Simple infections could spread uncontrollably. Patients who came in with minor injuries often left in coffins because of unsanitary conditions. Imagine lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by dozens of others in the same ward, with no privacy, no antibiotics, and doctors who didn't even wear gloves. Every cough, every moan, every scream of pain echoed across the room. Death wasn't a rare event. It was expected. Now think about the energy those walls must have absorbed. Decades of pain, suffering, last breaths, and unspoken goodbyes. Do you think that kind of energy ever really leaves a place? Or does it seep into the bricks, the floors, the air itself? Pause for a moment and tell me in the comments. If you had to walk through a hospital basement alone, would you do it? Yes or no? I want to see how many of you would actually take that risk. Abandoned wards and tragic memories. Fast forward to today. Many of those old hospitals no longer operate. Some were shut down because they couldn't keep up with modern medicine. Others closed because their reputations became too terrifying. Locals whispering about screams in the night or apparitions roaming the empty corridors. Walk into one of these abandoned wards now and you'll notice something strange. The silence doesn't feel empty. It feels heavy, like the air itself is holding on to stories you were never meant to hear. Paint peels off the walls. Rusted beds still sit in corners. Old wheelchairs remain tucked away as if waiting for a patient who will never return. And yet people who dare to explore these places report the same unsettling experiences. Sudden drops in temperature, voices calling their name, and figures moving in the dark. Could it be imagination? Maybe. But could it also be the echoes of history replaying themselves over and over again? Drop a emoji in the comments if you've ever visited an abandoned hospital, asylum, or even just an old building that gave you chills. Hospitals as portals between life and death. There is another idea that adds to this mystery. Hospitals are one of the few places in the world where the boundary between life and death is crossed every single day. People are born and people die, often in the very same building, sometimes even in the very same room. Think about that for a second. If you believe in energy, spirits, or the soul, then hospitals are like revolving doors between two realms. Some spirits may move on, while others linger, confused or unwilling to leave. It's no wonder so many ghost stories come from these places, from the whispers of patients who never made it home, to the shadows of doctors who refuse to abandon their posts even in death. Hospitals have become synonymous with hauntings. What about you? Do you believe spirits could be trapped in places where life and death constantly overlap? Comment yes if you believe they can, or no if you think that's just superstition. Michigan's haunted legacy begins here, and this is where our story truly begins. Michigan, like many states, has a long medical history. Some of its earliest hospitals were built in the mid-1800s, when medical science was still developing. Soldiers from wars, immigrants with new diseases, and towns plagued with epidemics all poured into these institutions. Many of those hospitals couldn't handle the pressure. Patients died by the hundreds. Entire wings became morgues, and as the years went by, some of those places fell silent, left behind, decaying, but never truly empty. Michigan's haunted hospitals are not just buildings. They are monuments to human suffering, places where history itself refuses to fade. And as we move deeper into this documentary, we'll uncover not just the ghost stories, but also the psychological and scientific reasons that explain why hospitals feel so different, especially when the sun goes down. But before we continue, let me ask you one last thing for this section. If you had to choose, Would you rather spend the night in a haunted house or in an abandoned hospital? Comment house or hospital below. I'll be checking to see which one wins. Because in Michigan, some of these hospitals make even the darkest haunted houses look tame. And stay with me until the very end, because the #1 haunted hospital in Michigan will send chills down your spine. Michigan may be famous for its lakes, forests, and old industrial towns, but hidden in its landscape is another kind of legacy, one soaked in suffering, sickness, and whispers of the dead. Hospitals here have been more than just places of healing. For over a century, they've been theaters of life and death, where tragedy unfolded in ways so intense that locals still believe the echoes never left. Think about it. Epidemics of tuberculosis, psychiatric asylums that experimented with questionable treatments, hospitals that couldn't keep up with the rapid spread of disease. For thousands of patients, Michigan hospitals were the final stop, and when the doors finally closed, many of these institutions were simply left to rot. But decay doesn't erase memories, it traps them. And that's why these hospitals have become hotspots for paranormal activity, drawing ghost hunters, urban explorers, and thrill seekers who want to know if the legends are real. Now here's where it gets exciting. Tonight, we were not just talking about hospitals in general. We were counting down the 15 most haunted hospitals in Michigan. These aren't just abandoned buildings. They're locations that locals refuse to step foot in, even in daylight. Some say you can hear the cries of patients from decades past. Others swear they've seen shadows moving across windows that should have been empty for years. Before we start, I want you to guess. Which number on this list do you think will be the scariest? Drop a number between 1 and 15 in the comments right now. And no skipping ahead. Let's see who guesses it right. Why hospitals in Michigan? Became so haunted. Michigan had one of the highest numbers of tuberculosis sanatoriums in the Midwest. These were places built specifically to quarantine patients with TB, which had no cure for decades. Whole families were torn apart as patients were sent away to die in isolated hospital wings. Many of those buildings still stand today, abandoned, their walls stained with history. Then there were the psychiatric hospitals. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, mental health care was poorly understood. Patients were subjected to experiments, harsh treatments, and in some cases, outright neglect. Overcrowding, mistreatment, and mysterious deaths weren't unusual. It's no wonder many believe their spirits still wander the halls. And we can't forget Michigan's industrial boom. With factories came accidents. With accidents came hospitals overflowing with injured workers. Many didn't survive. These tragedies piled onto the state's medical history, leaving scars that are more than just physical. If you were given the chance to explore an abandoned Michigan hospital overnight, would you do it? Yes or no? Comment below. I want to see how many of you are actually that brave. The countdown begins. Here's how this is going to work. We'll start at number 15 and work our way down to number 1. And trust me, every hospital on this list has a story that will make your skin crawl. But by the time we reach number 1, you'll understand why many say it's the most terrifying hospital in the entire Midwest. And no, I'm not exaggerating. Some of the places on this list are so haunted that even paranormal investigators refuse to return after what they experienced. So grab your headphones, turn off the lights if you dare, and settle in, because once we start this countdown, you won't be able to look away. Quick challenge. If you're watching this at night, type night crew in the comments. If it's daytime, type safe hours. Let's see how many of you are brave enough to join the night crew. Are you ready? Because this is where the journey begins. Coming in at number 15, Eloise Psychiatric Hospital, Westland, Michigan. If you've lived in Michigan long enough, chances are you've heard the name Eloise. Once a sprawling complex just outside Detroit, Eloise Psychiatric Hospital was more like a city than a hospital. At its peak, it stretched across 900 acres, with 78 buildings, housing thousands of patients. But what made Eloise infamous wasn't its size. It was what happened inside. Eloise began in the 1830s as a poorhouse and evolved into an asylum. By the late 1800s, it became one of the largest psychiatric facilities in the United States. Patients came here for everything from minor depression to severe mental illness. But with overcrowding came abuse, neglect, and endless suffering. Doctors experimented with treatments we would find horrifying today. Insulin shock therapy, hydrotherapy, even lobotomies. Many patients entered Eloise and never left. Locals still whisper that thousands of unmarked graves lie beneath the soil, where patients were buried without names, forgotten by the world. Their spirits, some believe, are anything but at rest. Ghost stories from Eloise visitors who dare to explore the crumbling remains of Eloise report terrifying encounters. Shadow figures dart across empty hallways. Disembodied voices call out names in the dark. Some say they've heard the faint sobbing of women echoing through the ruins, even when no one is there. One urban explorer claimed he felt an icy hand grab his shoulder in a locked ward, only to find the room completely empty. Paranormal investigators have recorded unexplained screams, whispers, and sudden drops in temperature that made the entire group shiver. The hospital's tunnels are said to be the most haunted of all. Once used to transport patients and supplies, they now sit in eerie silence. Explorers say you can hear footsteps following you in the dark, growing louder, until you turn around and find nothing. If you were offered $10,000 to spend one night in the tunnels of Eloise, would you take it? Comment yes or no below. I'm curious to see how many risk takers are watching. Why Eloise still haunts Michigan. Eloise isn't just a hospital. It is a reminder of how society once treated its most vulnerable. Thousands suffered there. Many in ways we'll never fully know. The energy of pain and neglect has seeped into the walls, the ground, the very air around the ruins. Some believe this is why spirits linger, unwilling to move on. Today, parts of Eloise have been demolished, while others remain standing as a stark reminder of its dark history. And while some developers have tried to breathe new life into the land, locals say the spirits don't want to be disturbed. Even now, security guards and staff working in renovated sections claim they've seen apparitions roaming the grounds. Lights flicker without explanation. Doors slam shut when no one is near. The haunting of Eloise is very much alive, and it's only number 15 on our list. Tell me in the comments, would you ever visit Eloise in person? Or is this one you'd rather admire from a distance? Because if this is how terrifying number 15 is, just wait until you hear what we've got coming next. Number 14, Northville Psychiatric Hospital, Northville, Michigan. On the surface, Northville Psychiatric Hospital was meant to represent progress. Built in 1952, it was one of Michigan's most advanced mental health facilities of its time. Unlike older asylums, Northville promised more humane treatments, spacious grounds, and a brighter future for psychiatric care. For a while, it lived up to that promise. Patients enjoyed open areas, recreational programs, and a sense of freedom rarely seen in psychiatric hospitals of the past. But as the years went on, Northville suffered the same fate as so many other institutions. Funding cuts, overcrowding, and neglect turned the once modern facility into a place of despair. By the 1970s and 80s, reports of abuse, mistreatment, and patient suffering began to leak out. In 2003, the hospital was officially shut down, leaving its massive buildings to decay in silence. The haunting of Northville. Once the hospital was abandoned, stories began to spread. Urban explorers who ventured into the vast, graffiti-covered halls claimed they felt like they were being watched. Paranormal investigators recorded unexplained voices in the darkness, whispers, screams, even faint laughter that seemed to come from nowhere. One group reported hearing a child's voice calling for help in one of the old therapy rooms, only to find it completely empty. Another explorer swore he saw a woman in a hospital gown standing at the end of a hallway, staring at him. But when he blinked, she was gone. The underground service tunnels are said to be the most active. These tunnels once connected different wings of the hospital, carrying patients, supplies, and sometimes even bodies. People who walk them today report footsteps echoing behind them, even though they're alone. Others say they've seen shadows moving against the walls, growing closer, then vanishing into the dark. Would you dare walk through Northville's tunnels alone, with just a flashlight, yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments. Why Northville's spirits remain. Some locals believe the spirits of patients still wander because they were never given peace in life. With the abrupt closure of the hospital, many patients were released suddenly, some with nowhere to go, others unable to understand what was happening. The confusion and trauma of that moment, some say, may have left an imprint on the grounds. Even after years of abandonment, strange activity continues. Police officers responding to trespassers have reported hearing footsteps and voices inside, only to find the building empty. One officer claimed he saw lights flicker in a wing that had no power. Today, Northville Psychiatric Hospital stands as a crumbling monument to forgotten promises and broken dreams. Its ruins are slowly being overtaken by nature, but the stories refuse to fade. For paranormal enthusiasts, it's one of the most haunted spots in Michigan, and it is only number 14 on our list. Quick question. If you could bring one piece of ghost hunting equipment to Northville, what would it be? An EMF meter, a spirit box, or just your phone camera? Comment below. Because as chilling as Northville is, the next hospital on our list has an even darker history, one that involves patients who were silenced forever. Coming in at number 13, Traverse City State Hospital, Traverse City, Michigan. If there's one place in Michigan that embodies both beauty and terror, it's Traverse City State Hospital. Originally known as the Northern Michigan Asylum, this sprawling institution opened its doors in 1885. Built in the Grand Kirkbride style, the hospital was designed to bring peace and calm to patients with mental illness. The tall spires, red brick walls, and picturesque grounds made it look more like a castle than an asylum. But as beautiful as it appeared from the outside, the reality inside was far more grim. Thousands of patients passed through its halls over the decades. Some found peace, but many found only pain. Treatments included electroshock therapy, isolation, and in some cases, experimental procedures that left patients traumatized for life. And of course, not everyone made it out. The hospital cemetery holds over 1,100 unmarked graves, patients who died here and were buried with no family to claim them. The spirits of Traverse City. The abandoned wings of Traverse City State Hospital are notorious among paranormal investigators. Visitors have reported hearing screams echoing through empty corridors, as though the pain of past patients is replaying itself again and again. Shadowy figures have been spotted moving in the old wards, especially near the attic and basement areas. One of the most chilling legends is of the so-called screaming patient. Explorers say if you stand quietly in certain hallways, you can hear the faint, distant sound of a woman crying, sometimes growing into a blood-curdling scream that seems to come from nowhere. Many believe this is the spirit of a patient who suffered greatly under experimental treatments and never found peace. Then there are the tunnels. Like many old hospitals, Traverse City had underground passageways that connected different buildings. Staff once used them to move patients discreetly. Today, they're pitch black, damp, and terrifying. People who venture inside report voices whispering directly into their ears, cold hands brushing against their arms, and footsteps following them when no one is there. Would you walk through those tunnels at midnight with nothing but a flashlight? Yes or no? Type your answer in the comments. And don't lie, I'll know. Why the haunting persists. What makes Traverse City especially eerie is the contrast between its outward beauty and its dark legacy. The grounds are peaceful, almost serene, yet the air feels heavy, as though the stories of the past are still alive. Paranormal groups that have investigated here consistently report high EMF spikes, sudden temperature drops, and disembodied voices caught on recorders. Even tourists who come to see the renovated parts of the hospital, now known as the Village at Grand Traverse Commons, say they've felt uneasy in certain areas. Some even refuse to go into the basements, claiming they felt like someone was watching them the entire time. The fact that so many people suffered here, often in silence and without recognition, may explain why the energy refuses to fade. Traverse City State Hospital is not just haunted by spirits, it is haunted by history itself. Be honest, if you visited Traverse City State Hospital, would you explore the haunted wings, or would you stick to the safe renovated areas? Drop your choice below, haunted or safe. And remember, this is just number 13. The hospitals are only going to get darker, creepier, and harder to forget from here on out. Number 12. Kalamazoo State Hospital, Kalamazoo, Michigan. In the heart of Michigan, there once stood a place that locals still whisper about, Kalamazoo State Hospital, also known as the Kalamazoo Regional Psychiatric Hospital. Opened in 1859, it was one of the earliest psychiatric facilities in the state. Like Traverse City, it was designed in the Kirkbride style, with long, stretching wings meant to give patients light and air. From the outside, it looked almost majestic, but behind its walls, the story was far more unsettling. For more than a century, the hospital treated thousands of patients, but treatment in those days often meant things we'd now consider barbaric. Ice water baths, electroshock therapy, restraints, and isolation were common. As the decades went by, stories of mistreatment, overcrowding, and patient abuse began to surface. Many patients never made it home. Some died from their conditions. Others, locals say, simply vanished into the system. Whispers in the wards. Even after parts of the hospital closed, strange stories lingered. Staff members who worked the night shifts often reported eerie occurrences. Doors that had been locked tight would suddenly swing open. Disembodied footsteps echoed down hallways when no one was there. Some nurses swore they heard patients crying, even though the wards were empty. One particularly chilling legend tells of a patient who died during an experimental treatment and was buried in the hospital's own graveyard. Visitors claim that on quiet nights, you can hear her moans drifting across the grounds, as though she's still searching for help. Then, there are the reports of shadows. Paranormal investigators who explored the abandoned sections captured figures darting across hallways on camera. Tall, dark outlines that seemed to move just out of sight. In one case, an investigator claimed something tugged on his coat so violently he thought someone was physically behind him. But when he turned, the hallway was empty. If you heard footsteps behind you in an abandoned hospital hallway, would you keep walking, or would you run? Comment below, walk or run. The Forgotten Graveyard. Perhaps the most haunting part of Kalamazoo State Hospital is not the buildings themselves, but the cemetery. Hidden away, the hospital's burial grounds are filled with unmarked graves. These were patients who died with no families to claim them. People who were forgotten by history. Locals say the cemetery is active with spiritual energy. Ghost hunters report their equipment going haywire here. EMF spikes, temperature drops, and even strange voices captured on audio. Some claim to have felt overwhelming sadness while standing among the graves, as if the souls buried there are still crying out to be remembered. The legacy of Kalamazoo. Today, parts of the hospital still stand, though many buildings have been demolished or repurposed. Yet its legacy remains one of Michigan's darkest. The stories of suffering, the countless lives lost, and the unexplained phenomena that continue to this day make Kalamazoo one of the state's most haunted hospitals. Would you spend an hour in Kalamazoo's old cemetery at night with nothing but a lantern? Yes or no? Drop your answer below. And here's the thing. If Kalamazoo is already this unsettling at number 12, just imagine what horrors are waiting as we move deeper down this list. Coming in at number 11. Pontiac State Hospital, Pontiac, Michigan. If you drive through Pontiac today, you'll find only whispers of what once stood there. But for decades, Pontiac State Hospital was one of the most feared institutions in Michigan. Opened in the late 19th century, it was originally called the Eastern Michigan Asylum. Like many psychiatric facilities of its time, Pontiac was built big, bold, and imposing, almost like a fortress. Its towering brick walls and long wings were meant to house hundreds of patients. But with overcrowding came neglect, and with neglect came stories that still haunt the community today. Pontiac was notorious for the sheer number of patients it admitted. By the early 1900s, thousands were crowded into its halls, with little privacy or comfort. Conditions deteriorated quickly. Treatments included ice baths, electroshock therapy, and heavy restraints. Nurses and doctors worked tirelessly, but many patients were left unattended for long stretches of time. Some died quietly in their beds. Others, locals say, died screaming. Hauntings within the walls. Even before the hospital was torn down, reports of hauntings were common. Staff members swore they saw figures in patient gowns walking the halls long after visiting hours were over. Others claimed they felt cold hands brushing against their arms while checking empty rooms. One particularly famous story tells of a nurse working the night shift who heard a woman crying down the hallway. She followed the sound, only to find the ward completely empty. Just as she turned to leave, the crying grew louder, right behind her ear. She ran, refusing to ever work the night shift again. Visitors to the ruins before demolition often reported strange activity too. Disembodied voices echoed in the stairwells. Shadowy figures appeared in doorways. Paranormal investigators captured recordings of moans and even screams on tape. And almost everyone who entered claimed they felt an overwhelming sense of dread, like the building itself was alive and watching them. What would you do if you heard someone crying right behind you in an abandoned hospital? Comment below. Stay or run. The forgotten patients. Perhaps the most tragic part of Pontiac State Hospital's story is the patients who never left. Many who died there were buried in unmarked graves, their names lost to time. Locals believe these restless souls are the ones who still wander, unable to move on because they were forgotten in life and in death. Even after the hospital was demolished, strange reports continued from the grounds. People who pass by at night claim to see glowing lights in the field where the main building once stood. Some hear faint screams carried on the wind. Others say they've seen ghostly figures wandering through the grass, as if searching for the hospital that no longer exists. Pontiac's legacy. Though the building is gone, Pontiac State Hospital's legacy remains etched in Michigan's haunted history. The sheer scale of suffering that occurred there left a permanent mark, and locals still avoid the grounds after dark. Paranormal researchers often claim that when a building is demolished, spirits tied to it don't disappear. They linger, confused and restless, bound to the land itself. Do you think tearing down a haunted hospital makes the spirits leave? Or do they stay tied to the land forever? Comment, leave, or stay below. I'll be looking for your answers. And here's the frightening part. Pontiac was bad enough to earn the number 11 spot, but we have not even broken into the top 10 yet. From here on out, the stories only get more disturbing. Coming in at number 10, Harper Hospital, Detroit, Michigan. In the bustling heart of Detroit sits a hospital that looks ordinary to most people, but behind its modern walls lies a chilling past that refuses to stay buried. This is Harper Hospital, and its ghostly reputation stretches all the way back to the Civil War. When it opened in 1863, Harper was immediately pressed into service for the Union Army. Wounded soldiers were shipped here from bloody battlefields, and the hospital quickly became a place of both healing and heartbreak. More than 2,000 men took their final breaths within its wards, many far from home, their families never given a chance to say goodbye. The soldiers who never left. To this day, visitors and staff report seeing shadowy figures in the hallways, men in outdated military uniforms who vanish the second you look twice. Some nurses swear they've heard boots echoing in the corridors at night, heavy footsteps that stop abruptly when no one is there. There are stories of patients waking up to find a soldier standing silently by their bed, staring down at them. By the time they scream for help, the figure fades into nothing. Paranormal investigators who've brought recording equipment inside claim to have captured voices calling out words like help and home. If you woke up in a hospital room and saw a ghostly soldier staring at you, would you shut your eyes and pretend you didn't see him, or scream for help? Comment below. Eyes closed, or scream. The surgical theater. One of the most haunted spots at Harper is the old surgical wing. During the Civil War, surgeries were often done in crude, painful conditions, with little anesthesia and almost no antiseptics. Many soldiers died on the operating tables. Staff who work late nights today say they sometimes hear the unmistakable sounds of surgery, clinking metal, hurried footsteps, and muffled groans of pain, even though the rooms are empty. Harper's restless legacy. Even though Harper Hospital has grown and modernized into one of Detroit's leading medical centers, its haunted reputation continues. Doctors and nurses may not always admit it publicly, but off the record, many share the same uneasy stories. Phantom footsteps, sudden cold spots, and the feeling of being watched when they're completely alone. Visitors often describe a heavy sadness in the air, especially at night. As one paranormal researcher put it, you don't just feel history at Harper, you feel the weight of all the souls who never left. Do you think hospitals that are still active can be just as haunted as abandoned ones? Drop your thoughts below. I'll be pinning some of the best answers. Why Harper still haunts. Harper ESE ghosts are not just the echoes of patients. They are soldiers whose lives were cut short in a time of unimaginable violence. Their unfinished stories, their pain, and their longing for home may be why they're still seen walking the halls. And here's the chilling part. Harper is still open today. That means if you ever find yourself in Detroit, you could walk the same halls where phantom soldiers are said to march. And you might just see one yourself. If Harper feels unsettling enough to crack the top 10, wait until you see what's next, because number 9 takes us into even darker territory. Number 9, Ionia State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, Ionia, Michigan. If Eloise was a city of the forgotten, then Ionia State Hospital was something darker, a fortress of the damned. Built in the 1880s, this massive asylum was reserved for some of the most dangerous and disturbed patients in Michigan. It stood on a hill, looming over the small town of Ionia like a shadow. Its high fences and guarded gates a reminder that not everyone inside was meant to be saved. Patients at Ionia were not only mentally ill, but often convicted criminals, transferred from prisons because they were deemed insane. The hospital became infamous for its harsh conditions. Restraints, isolation cells, and experimental treatments were common. Whispers of abuse and neglect spread, and many patients died behind its walls, some violently. The darkest corridors. Even after its closure in the late 20th century, Ionia's reputation as one of the most haunted places in Michigan only grew. Former staff and paranormal investigators claim the building is alive with activity. Shadow figures have been spotted pacing the abandoned corridors, doors slam shut without warning, and visitors often report the overwhelming feeling of being followed. One particularly chilling legend is of the Laughing Man. Paranormal groups exploring the hospital have reported hearing bursts of laughter echoing down the hallways. Harsh, manic laughter that seems to come from nowhere. Some investigators believe it as the spirit of a patient who died in isolation after years of mental deterioration. If you heard laughter in an abandoned asylum, would you chase it to see who or what was there? Comment below, follow or flee. The isolation cells. The isolation rooms at Ionia are said to be especially active. Visitors describe sudden drops in temperature, loud bangs against the walls, and even the sensation of hands grabbing at them in the dark. One investigator who spent the night in a cell reported that something whispered his name over and over until he had to be pulled out, visibly shaken. Others claimed to see full apparitions, figures in tattered clothing, faces twisted in anguish, appearing at the ends of hallways before vanishing into the walls. The residual energy. Unlike many hospitals where spirits seem lost or confused, the energy at Ionia feels darker. Paranormal researchers believe this is because of the extreme emotions tied to the place: rage, violence, fear, and despair. It's said that the very walls absorbed the trauma, creating a kind of psychic imprint that replays itself endlessly. Do you think violent deaths leave behind stronger hauntings than peaceful ones? Comment yes or no. I want to see what you think. Why Ionia still terrifies. Though much of the hospital has been demolished, the land it stood on is still whispered about in the town. Locals avoid going near it after dark, saying the screams and laughter still echo in the night air. For paranormal enthusiasts, Ionia is one of the most terrifying entries in Michigan's haunted history. If the ghosts of soldiers haunt Harper at number 10, the tortured souls of criminals and patients make Ionia at number 9 even more disturbing. And yet, the countdown only gets more horrifying from here. Coming in at number 8, Hurley Medical Center, Flint, Michigan. At first glance, Hurley Medical Center in Flint looks like any other busy hospital. It is modern, it is active, and every day it saves countless lives. But behind the bright lights and the steady hum of machines, there are stories that chill even the bravest nurses to the bone. Hurley opened its doors in 1908, and with over a century of medical history, it has seen tragedy, trauma, and death on a massive scale. That kind of history leaves a mark, and many believe that S.Y. Hurley has become one of the most haunted hospitals still operating in Michigan today. The Children's Ward. Ask almost anyone who has worked at Hurley, and they will tell you the same thing. The Children's Ward is the heart of the hauntings. Nurses whisper about toys that move on their own, doors that open and close without explanation, and, most unsettling of all, the sound of children laughing or crying in the middle of the night, even when the ward is empty. One nurse shared a story about walking past a patient room and seeing tiny handprints pressed against the glass from the inside. But the room was unoccupied. When she looked closer, the handprints slowly faded, as if wiped away by invisible fingers. Would you dare spend a night alone in a haunted children's ward, listening to ghostly laughter? Comment below, yes or never. The Phantom Nurse Hurley also has its own Lady in White legend. Staff members claim to see a nurse dressed in outdated white clothing from the 1950s. She appears in hallways, quietly checking on patients before vanishing without a sound. Some patients who have seen her say she even adjusts their blankets or touches their arm gently, as if comforting them. But here is the eerie twist. No one alive matches her description, and when patients describe her face, staff recognize it from an old photo of a nurse who died decades ago. The elevators that move themselves. Another chilling part of Hurley's hauntings comes from the elevators. Staff claim the elevators sometimes stop on random floors, open their doors, and wait, even though no one is inside. Paranormal investigators who visited the hospital suggested that the elevators might be responding to phantom passengers, spirits still trying to move between wards. If a hospital elevator door opened in front of you and no one was there, would you step inside or take the stairs? Comment below, elevator or stairs. Why Hurley haunts us still. Unlike many of the other hospitals on this list, Hurley is still in full operation. That means its hauntings are ongoing, witnessed by staff, patients, and visitors every single year. There is something uniquely terrifying about a haunted hospital that's still alive with activity, because the line between the living and the dead feels even thinner. From ghostly nurses to restless children, Hurley Medical Center has earned its place as one of the most haunted hospitals in Michigan. And the scariest part? You could check in as a patient today and find yourself face to face with a ghost. If Hurley is this unsettling at number 8, brace yourself, because number 7 takes us even deeper into Michigan's most terrifying wards. Number 7, Michigan State Sanatorium, Howell, Michigan. Tucked away in Howell once stood a place built to fight disease, but it became a house of suffering and, according to many, a prison of restless spirits. This was the Michigan State Sanatorium, opened in 1907 to treat patients with tuberculosis, a disease that was almost always a slow, painful death sentence in the early 20th century. The sanatorium was massive, with long white corridors, sunrooms, and isolation wards. Doctors believed fresh air and sunlight were the best treatments, so patients were often left on open-air porches, even in the freezing Michigan winters. Thousands died here, many of them young, their lives cut short by an illness that had no cure. Echoes of the dying visitors and paranormal investigators claim the sanatorium is still alive with energy from those who perished there. People walking the grounds report hearing coughing in the wind, the ragged, painful coughs of the sick, even though the building has been closed for decades. In the old wards, shadows are said to move across the walls. Some explorers describe hearing voices whispering their names, while others have felt icy fingers brush against their arms. One group reported seeing a woman in a hospital gown standing at the end of a hallway. She didn't move. She just stared at them until they turned to run. When they looked back, the hallway was empty. If you saw a ghost standing silently at the end of a hallway, would you approach it or turn and run? Comment below, approach or run. The morgue and crematorium. Perhaps the most terrifying parts of the sanatorium were its morgue and crematorium. With so many deaths, the hospital had to handle bodies quickly. Paranormal groups who have entered these areas describe overwhelming feelings of dread. Temperatures drop suddenly. EVP recorders pick up voices saying things like, "Get out," or "Help me." Some investigators claim they've been pushed, scratched, or even choked while exploring. There's also a legend of the man in the basement. Explorers say a tall, shadowy figure with glowing eyes lurks near the crematorium. He doesn't just appear in shadows. People say he charges at you, forcing even the bravest ghost hunters to flee. The restless patients locals believe the spirits here remain because of how much suffering occurred on the grounds. Many patients were cut off from their families, isolated in their final moments, and buried nearby in unmarked graves. The weight of loneliness, despair, and pain seems to linger, replaying itself night after night. Would you be brave enough to step into the old morgue of a haunted sanatorium at night? Comment below, yes or no. Why the sanatorium still haunts Michigan. Though the original buildings have been torn down, people still swear the land itself is haunted. Strange lights flicker in the fields where the wards once stood. Phantom coughs and cries are heard by those who live nearby. Some even claim to see ghostly figures walking the grounds, as if they are still searching for the sunlight treatments that never saved them. The Michigan State Sanatorium may be gone physically, but its reputation remains, a reminder that some tragedies don't fade with time. If the sanatorium is terrifying enough to take number 7, wait until you see what is waiting in the top 6. From here, the stories only grow darker. Number 6. St. Joseph's Hospital, Detroit, Michigan. Deep in the heart of Detroit once stood St. Joseph's Hospital, one of Michigan's earliest Catholic hospitals, built in the mid-1800s. On the surface, it was a place of healing, run by devoted nuns and doctors. But as decades passed, the building collected layer after layer of tragedy. And today, it's remembered less for medicine and more for the chilling hauntings that linger within its walls. The Nun Who Never Left, one of the most famous ghost stories from St. Joseph's, involves a nun who cared for patients tirelessly during a deadly influenza outbreak. She worked until she herself became sick and died inside the hospital. Staff and visitors still report seeing her wandering the darkened hallways, rosary in hand, whispering prayers for the sick. But here is where it gets terrifying. Some patients claim to wake up in the middle of the night to see her standing over their bed, praying. And in several cases, the patients died just hours later. People began to call her the Death Nun, a spectral figure that seemed to appear only when someone's time was near. If you saw a ghostly nun standing by your hospital bed at night, would you feel comforted or terrified? Comment below, comforted or terrified. The crying walls visitors to the old hospital claimed to hear the sound of weeping echoing through empty rooms. Some swore the cries came from the walls themselves, as if the building absorbed the pain of countless deaths. Maintenance workers who had to check on the old boiler rooms refused to go in alone, saying they could hear moans and whispers following them in the dark. One urban explorer even reported that while filming, his camera picked up a faint voice whispering, "Stay with me." He didn't hear it at the time, only when he reviewed the footage later. Children's ward hauntings. Like many hospitals, St. Joseph's had a ward for children, and according to stories, it remains the most active spot. People describe toys moving by themselves, ghostly giggles echoing in the dark, and wheelchairs rolling across the floor with no one in them. The most disturbing reports, though, are of a small boy in a hospital gown who appears in the hallway and asks visitors, "Have you seen my mom?" When they blink, he disappears. Would you have the courage to answer a ghost child if he asked you a question? Yes or no? Drop it in the comments. Why St. Joseph's still terrifies Detroit. Though much of the original hospital has been closed, the legends never died. Paranormal investigators who visited say St. Joseph's carries an oppressive energy, heavy, suffocating, and sorrowful. Even without the equipment, anyone who walks those hallways can feel the weight of centuries of suffering. This hospital was built on faith and compassion, but its ghost stories are some of the darkest in Michigan. A nun who signals death, walls that cry with sorrow, and children who never found peace. St. Joseph's earns its chilling spot at number 6. And if you think this is terrifying, wait until you see number 5. From here on, the stories only get darker, more violent, and impossible to forget. Number 5. Marquette Branch Prison Hospital, Marquette, Michigan. Now this one is different. Unlike the other hospitals on our list, the Marquette Branch Prison Hospital wasn't built for the public. It was built for prisoners. And that makes it one of the darkest, most terrifying places in Michigan. The prison itself opened in the late 1800s, and with it came a hospital wing to treat inmates. But remember, this was not a place of mercy. Many of the men who entered never left alive. Executions, beatings, suicides, and violent deaths filled the air with suffering, and some say those restless souls are still locked inside. The screams in the night guards and staff who worked the night shifts swore that the hospital wing was the worst place in the entire prison. They reported screams echoing through empty cells, doors slamming shut when no one was there, and the unmistakable sound of shackles dragging across the floor. One former officer confessed that he hated walking the hospital corridors because every time he did, he felt invisible eyes watching him. He said the temperature would plummet, and sometimes he could hear faint whispers saying his name. Imagine being a prison guard, alone in a haunted hospital wing at 3 a.m. Would you finish the shift or walk out? Comment below, stay or leave. The Ghost of Cell Block. One of the hospital's most famous legends is tied to Cell Block 9. Inmates claimed a man who was beaten to death by guards never left. His ghost appears as a shadow figure pacing up and down the halls. Some say he rattles the bars violently, while others believe he follows anyone who dares enter, breathing down their neck. Urban explorers who have managed to sneak inside describe sudden pressure on their chests, making it hard to breathe, as if the ghost himself is holding them down. The operating room. The hospital also had an operating room where prisoners underwent surgery, often without proper anesthesia. Many of those procedures ended in death. Today, people say the room is still filled with screams. Investigators have recorded chilling EVPs, voices crying out, "Stop," or "It hurts." One group even reported seeing a man in a hospital gown standing in the corner, staring. When they turned their flashlight toward him, he was gone. Would you dare step into an abandoned prison operating room at night? Drop a if your answer is yes. Why? It is one of Michigan's darkest haunts. The Marquette Branch Prison Hospital is more than haunted. It's cursed by violence, pain, and injustice. Every brick seems to hold a memory of suffering, and unlike other hospitals built to heal, this one was built to punish. That's why many believe the spirits here are not just lost. They are angry, and they are not afraid to make their presence known to anyone who dares enter. If the prison hospital makes your skin crawl at number 5, just wait. The next 4 hospitals will leave you questioning if you ever walk through a Michigan ward after dark. Number 4, Harper Hospital, Detroit, Michigan. If Detroit has a heart of medical history, it's Harper Hospital. Built in 1863 during the Civil War, it was one of the first hospitals in Michigan to treat wounded soldiers. That means from day one, its halls were filled with blood, pain, and death. Over the decades, Harper became one of the busiest hospitals in the state, and many believe the sheer amount of suffering within its walls left behind more than just memories. Civil War Spirits. Harper opened its doors at the height of the Civil War. Soldiers with missing limbs, torn flesh, and mortal wounds were brought here by the dozens. Surgeons worked around the clock, often amputating without proper anesthetics. The screams of those men echoed through the wards, and some say they still do. Visitors have reported seeing men in Civil War uniforms wandering the hospital's older wings. Patients have described hearing boots stomping down the hallway at night, only for no one to be there. Paranormal investigators captured EVPs of groaning voices saying, "Doctor," and "Help me," in what used to be surgical wards. If you suddenly saw a wounded Civil War soldier standing in a hospital hallway, would you run to help or run the other way? Comment, help or run. The Elevator Ghost. One of Harper's most chilling modern legends involves its elevators. Staff and patients alike have reported riding alone, only to feel the elevator stop at a random floor. The doors open, and standing there is a man in outdated hospital garb, pale, bloody, and staring. He never steps inside. He just looks at you and vanishes when the doors close. Some workers refuse to ride the elevators alone because of these stories, preferring the stairs no matter how many floors they need to climb. Be honest. If an elevator door opened to reveal a ghostly figure staring at you, would you step out or stay put? Comment below. Step out or stay put. The shadow in the surgery wing. Doctors and nurses working late have told stories of a tall, shadowy figure that lingers in the old surgical wing. It's described as darker than the dark itself, with no features, just a void that moves. One nurse claimed she was charting notes when she saw the shadow figure glide across the room and stop behind her. She froze, too afraid to turn around. After a full minute, it slipped through the wall and was gone. Investigators believe this entity might not be a single ghost, but the collective energy of trauma from thousands of surgeries and deaths performed there. Why Harper still haunts Detroit. Unlike many abandoned hospitals, Harper is still standing and active, which makes its hauntings even more unnerving. Staff don't just tell ghost stories for fun, they live them. Patients check in for healing, only to report terrifying encounters they can't explain. From Civil War soldiers to shadowy figures, Harper Hospital has more than earned its place as one of Michigan's most haunted medical sites. And at number 4, we're only scratching the surface. Because the top 3, they are on another level. Stories so chilling that even seasoned ghost hunters hesitate before stepping inside. Number 3, Clinton Valley Center, Pontiac, Michigan. If there was ever a place in Michigan that embodied horror, it was Clinton Valley Center. Originally built in the 1870s as the Oakland County Asylum for the Insane, this massive psychiatric institution became notorious for overcrowding, mistreatment, and cruelty. Thousands of patients passed through its gates, many never left alive. By the time it closed in the 1990s, Clinton Valley had earned a reputation as one of the darkest hospitals in the Midwest. And those who've explored the abandoned ruins claim the spirits trapped inside are anything but quiet. The lurking shadows. Urban explorers and former staff tell chilling stories of the asylum's endless hallways. At night, shadows move against the walls, but not like ordinary shadows. These are tall, human-shaped, and they don't always obey the light. Some say they follow you, staying just out of reach until suddenly they vanish. One group of investigators swore they saw a dark figure sprint across the hallway and into a locked room. When they forced the door open, the room was empty, but the air was ice cold. If you saw a shadow figure run into a locked room, would you open the door to check or walk away? Comment below. Check or walk away. The screams of the forgotten Clinton Valley was infamous for its treatment methods. Electroshock therapy, lobotomies, and heavy restraints were common. People who go inside say they can still hear the echoes of that pain. Distant screams, cries for help, and even the rattling of metal restraints have been recorded. One explorer shared a story of hearing a woman's voice whisper directly into his ear. "They hurt me." He ran and never came back. The basement tunnels. Perhaps the most terrifying part of Clinton Valley was its underground tunnels. These were used to transport patients, bodies, and supplies. Today, the tunnels are pitch black and soaked in paranormal legends. Explorers report being shoved in the dark, scratched, and even feeling something grab their ankles. EVPs captured chilling voices, including one that clearly said, "Stay down here with us." Would you dare walk alone through an abandoned asylum tunnel with only a flashlight? Comment, yes or no. Why Clinton Valley is in the top 3. This hospital does not just feel haunted, it feels angry. The suffering that took place within its walls was immense, and many believe the spirits here are restless, bitter, and dangerous. Even the bravest ghost hunters admit Clinton Valley Center has an energy unlike anywhere else. It is no wonder this asylum sits at number 3 on our list. But as terrifying as it is, what waits at number 2 and number 1 is far, far worse. Number 2, Lapeer State Home and Training School, Lapeer, Michigan. Few places in Michigan carry a reputation as dark as the Lapeer State Home and Training School. Built in the late 1800s, it was originally designed as an institution for children and adults with developmental disabilities. But behind its official mission of care, the reality was far more sinister. For decades, thousands of residents lived and died within its walls. Stories of abuse, neglect, and mistreatment haunted the facility until its eventual closure in the 1990s. And today, many believe the spirits of those who suffered there have never left. The children's laughter, one of the most chilling accounts, comes from the old children's dormitories. Visitors have reported hearing laughter echoing through empty rooms, followed by the sound of running footsteps. Some explorers said they even saw small figures darting across the hallways, but when they chased after them, The rooms were completely empty. One investigator left a ball in the middle of a hallway. Minutes later, it rolled slowly forward, as if pushed by unseen hands. If you heard children laughing in an abandoned asylum, would you follow the sound or get out immediately? Comment below, follow or run. The crying woman. Another common sighting is a ghostly woman who roams the grounds, sobbing. Witnesses describe her as wearing a nurse's uniform, her face hidden by her hands. Some believe she was a caretaker overwhelmed by the suffering she saw every day. Others say she's a spirit trapped by guilt. One group of paranormal researchers swore they caught her voice on tape, whispering, "I'm sorry." The basement ward. Perhaps the most terrifying location in the Lapeer State Home is the basement ward, where the most difficult patients were kept. Shackles were reportedly still attached to the walls long after the institution closed. Explorers claim to feel sudden pressure on their chests in this area, as though unseen hands are trying to hold them down. EVPs captured voices crying, "Don't leave us and help." One investigator reported being scratched across the arm, the marks lasting for days. Would you dare step into a basement ward where people were once shackled to the walls? Comment, yes or never. Why Lapeer still horrifies Michigan. The Lapeer State Home wasn't just a hospital, it was a place of unimaginable suffering. Thousands of lives ended there, many forgotten in unmarked graves nearby. Locals say the energy of despair is so strong that even standing outside the grounds can make you feel sick. With ghost children, weeping spirits, and a history of cruelty, the Lapeer State Home has earned its place as one of Michigan's most haunted sites, and it takes the chilling spot at Breach Out 2. But if this made your skin crawl, prepare yourself, because number 1 is so infamous, so terrifying, that even seasoned investigators refuse to step inside after dark. Number 1. Detroit's Herman Kiefer Hospital, Detroit, Michigan. If there is one hospital in Michigan that rivals Eloise in infamy, it's Herman Kiefer Hospital. Built in 1911, it was originally designed to treat contagious diseases like smallpox, diphtheria, and tuberculosis. That alone set the stage for tragedy, because almost everyone who entered never came out alive. By the time it closed in 2013, Herman Kiefer had built up over a century of fear, sorrow, and whispered legends. Today, it's considered one of Detroit's most terrifying abandoned places, the isolation wards. Herman Kiefer was designed with massive isolation wings to keep the sick away from the healthy. Patients lived and died alone, sometimes locked away from human contact for months. Explorers say the silence of these abandoned wards is crushing, and then, without warning, it's broken by coughing. Paranormal teams have recorded disembodied voices calling, "Nurse," and "Help me," in the old TB wings. One visitor even claimed to see a pale man standing at the end of a hallway, only to watch him vanish into the wall. If you were locked in an abandoned hospital ward and heard coughing behind you, would you turn around? Comment below, yes or no. The morgue and autopsy rooms. Like all old hospitals, Herman Kiefer had a morgue, but this one was massive, designed to handle outbreaks that killed dozens at a time. People who enter the autopsy rooms today report the smell of rot, even though the hospital has been empty for years. EVPs captured chilling voices saying, "Don't leave me," and "Get out." Investigators claim cold spots move with them, as though something unseen is following their every step. One group of explorers swore they saw an operating table shift across the floor on its own, heavy steel sliding over cracked tile, with no explanation. The ghostly doctor. Several legends speak of a ghostly doctor who still roams the halls. He has been described as tall, wearing a long white coat and carrying a clipboard. Witnesses say he appears suddenly, walks calmly past, and disappears through a doorway. Paranormal investigators call him the Doctor of Death, believing he may have been a physician who worked through deadly epidemics, and perhaps never left his post. Would you follow a ghost doctor if he appeared in front of you, or would you run the other way? Comment, follow, or run. Why Herman Kiefer takes number 1. With over 100 years of death, disease, and sorrow inside its walls, Herman Kiefer is a place heavy with tragedy. Unlike Eloise, which became infamous for psychiatric treatment, Herman Kiefer's hauntings are rooted in disease, isolation, and mass death. That makes it uniquely terrifying, because the ghosts here don't just feel restless. They feel contagious, as if their suffering is something you could still catch just by stepping inside. And that's why Herman Kiefer Hospital deserves the crown as the #1 most haunted hospital in Michigan. Which hospital on this list gave you the worst chills? Type the number 15, 10, 5, or 1 in the comments, and let's see which spot creeps people out the most. And there you have it. The 15 most haunted hospitals in Michigan. From the ghostly screams inside Eloise, to the restless patients of Traverse City, and finally to the dark shadows of Detroit's Herman Kiefer Hospital. These wards carry stories that will never die. But now, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, which of these hospitals gave you the worst chills? Was it Eloise at the start, Traverse City's dark asylum halls, or Herman Kiefer at the very end? Type the number that scared you most. And here is another one. Are you watching this video at night or during the day? Drop a comment that says night crew if it's after dark where you are, or safe hours if it's daytime. Let's see which side is braver. I will be reading the comments and pinning the most interesting ones, so don't be shy. And because I love seeing this, tell me what country or state you are watching from, and what time it is right now. We have had people watching these haunted history videos from everywhere, the US, Canada, the UK, even viewers from places like the Philippines, Netherlands, and Brazil. Let's see how global our haunted family really is. If you made it all the way to the end, that makes you part of our haunted history community. You're officially one of the brave ones, so here is your challenge. Smash that like button so more people discover these ghost stories. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a midnight premiere. And share this video with a friend who says they are not scared of ghosts. Let's see if they can sit through this countdown without jumping. Remember, hospitals are places of life and death, healing and sorrow. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the walls of these abandoned wards are heavy with history. And sometimes, history doesn't stay quiet. This is Vanguard Vault signing off. Stay curious, stay brave, and never ever wander alone through a hospital after dark. Until next time, good night and good luck. In the heart of California, beneath the sunshine and glamour, lies a darker history. These are places where life once clung desperately to hope, where hospitals promised healing but delivered despair. Here, in abandoned wards and crumbling wings, whispers still echo. Whispers of footsteps, of cries for help, of souls that could never leave. Tonight we walk into those forgotten halls. We descend into the shadowed corners of 15 of the most haunted hospitals in California. Each site carries not only the weight of tragedy, but the presence of something unseen, something that lingers still. Stay until the end, for the #1 most haunted hospital on this list will test the limits of what you believe is possible. Its reputation alone chills even the bravest of ghost hunters, and its story is one you will not forget. So now, let us begin. Number 15. The Vallejo Naval and Marine Hospital. Vallejo. Long before Vallejo was known for its naval shipyards, it housed the state's oldest marine hospital, first built in 1850. Here, sailors and immigrants stricken with yellow fever, cholera, and tuberculosis were treated in bleak, crowded wards. But treatment in the 19th century was more often a slow wait for death than a true chance of survival. Hundreds died here, their bodies shrouded and carried out before dawn. Families were rarely notified, and in many cases, patients were buried in unmarked graves on the surrounding land. The hospital's reputation grew grim, whispered about even during its years of operation as a place of suffering. Today, the building has been transformed into a museum, yet its shadows remain restless. Staff members report sudden cold drafts that swirl without explanation, and visitors tell of pale figures glimpsed at the top of staircases. The sound most often recounted is coughing, persistent, hacking coughs that echo in empty rooms. A local guide once admitted that, while locking up for the night, he saw a man in a tattered navy coat leaning against the wall. When he stepped closer, the man simply dissolved, leaving only silence behind. Many believe these lingering spirits are the forgotten sailors who died far from home, their final cries unanswered. The Vallejo Naval Hospital stands as a reminder: when death outnumbers hope, despair will never rest. Number 14. Agnew State Hospital, San Jose. Opened in 1885, Agnew State Hospital was built as a psychiatric institution on the edge of San Jose. It was hailed as progressive at the time, but the treatments were anything but humane. Patients endured isolation, electroshock, and primitive experiments that stripped away dignity and sanity alike. The hospital's history is marked by one of California's greatest tragedies. In 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake struck with violent force, and Agnew's collapsed. Over 100 patients and staff were killed instantly, crushed beneath the falling brick and iron. For those who survived, the cries of the trapped and dying haunted the grounds for days. When the hospital was rebuilt, new patients filled its wards, but death never truly left. Reports spread of ghostly figures wandering the corridors, their faces blurred, their bodies twisted in impossible ways. Some say the spirits of those who perished in the earthquake still stagger through the ruins, endlessly searching for escape. Locals claim that late at night near the original foundations, voices can be heard calling out. Some are frantic, screaming for help. Others are soft, murmuring prayers as though awaiting rescue that never came. Security guards who once patrolled the grounds spoke of doors slamming shut, followed by the unmistakable sound of sobbing in the dark. One chilling story comes from a nurse who worked there in the 1950s. She told of hearing footsteps pacing the empty women's ward, long after visiting hours had ended. When she went to investigate, she saw the faint outline of a woman in a hospital gown. The figure's face was obscured, and as the nurse drew closer, it simply faded into the wall. Agnew's closed its doors in 1998, but its grounds are said to remain haunted to this day. The earthquake victims, the tortured patients, and the countless forgotten souls are believed to wander still, tethered to the ruins of their suffering. 2 hospitals down, and 13 still to uncover. Each one darker, each one more unsettling than the last. If you thought sailors' whispers and earthquake shadows were disturbing, what waits ahead will leave you questioning whether hospitals heal, or whether some wounds can never be closed. On the quiet outskirts of Talmadge once stood Mendocino State Hospital, founded in 1893. It began as an asylum for the mentally ill, part of a growing network of state-run facilities. The goal was treatment, but history tells us the reality was far grimmer. By the 1930s, the hospital had swelled with thousands of patients, many committed against their will. Treatments included ice baths, straitjackets, and primitive shock therapies. Whispers of mistreatment and abuse circulated for decades, yet the patients had no voice. The asylum also became home to criminally insane patients transferred from San Quentin and Folsom. Among them were murderers and violent offenders, housed side by side with the mentally ill. The line between punishment and care blurred, leaving scars that would never heal. It is said that hundreds died behind its locked doors. Some passed quietly, but others met violent ends. Suicides, assaults, unexplained disappearances. Bodies were buried in the hospital cemetery, most in graves marked only with numbers. Locals who venture near the old grounds speak of hearing screams in the night, echoing across the empty fields. Dark figures appear at the edges of vision, only to vanish when approached. Some claim to feel a crushing weight, as though unseen hands are pressing down upon them. Former employees tell stories of wards where lights flickered constantly, and of wheelchairs moving on their own in deserted hallways. One doctor recalled entering a locked patient room to find claw marks etched deep into the plaster walls, yet the patient inside had no fingernails left to scratch. Another nurse swore she heard a voice calling her name, though the ward was empty. The hospital was closed in 1972, its buildings abandoned to decay. But even now, those who pass by the overgrown remains say they feel watched. The asylum may be gone, but the echoes of its suffering linger, clinging to the soil itself. Mendocino State Hospital stands as a monument to despair, and to the restless spirits who never escaped its grasp. Number 12. Napa State Hospital, Napa. Not far from the vineyards and rolling hills of Napa lies another institution with a chilling past. Napa State Hospital opened in 1875 as an asylum for the insane. Its grand brick structures and sprawling grounds mask the misery within. In its earliest years, patients lived in overcrowded wards, often in chains. Treatments were crude, ranging from cold water therapies to experimental drugs, and for many, confinement was a life sentence. The 20th century brought even darker chapters. By the 1940s, Napa housed over 5,000 patients, many subjected to lobotomies and shock therapy. The asylum's reputation grew notorious, whispered about by locals who feared what went on inside. The hospital has also been the scene of violence. Patients have attacked staff, sometimes fatally, while others turned on themselves. In one chilling case, a patient vanished entirely, never to be found, despite searches of the entire grounds. Stories of the paranormal soon followed. Visitors and staff reported disembodied voices calling from the tunnels beneath the hospital. Doors would slam without warning, and cold spots appeared in rooms where patients had died. One former orderly described hearing laughter echoing down the men's ward at midnight. When he followed the sound, he found the ward empty, every door locked tight. He resigned the next morning, unwilling to return. The hospital cemetery holds over 1,000 graves, most unmarked. Those buried there were forgotten by families, left to anonymity. Some believe the spirits of these neglected souls still wander, desperate to be remembered. Even today, Napa State Hospital continues to function, but its haunted reputation has not faded. Staff speak in hushed tones of shadows gliding through hallways, or sudden chills that stop them in their tracks, and the tunnels beneath remain a place few dare to enter alone. For those who know its history, Napa is not merely a hospital. It is a threshold between the living and the dead, where echoes of centuries past still whisper through the walls. 2 more names have been added to our list, each carrying stories of cruelty, despair, and lingering phantoms. But we are only at number 12. As we move deeper into California's haunted hospitals, the stories will grow darker and the spirits more restless. Number 11, Stockton State Hospital. Stockton opened in 1851. Stockton State Hospital was California's first public psychiatric institution. It began with hopeful intentions, but quickly became overwhelmed by the sheer number of patients committed within its walls. From the very beginning, it carried an air of hopelessness. The early wards were overcrowded, often housing 2 or 3 patients to a bed. Violent and non-violent patients were forced to live together, creating chaos and despair. Treatment often meant little more than confinement, and discipline was harsh. Reports of abuse surfaced throughout its history. Patients were chained in basements, left in darkness for days at a time. Others were subjected to experimental cures that left them broken, both physically and mentally. The hospital's cemetery tells its own story. Thousands of patients were buried there, most in unmarked graves. No names, no memorials, just numbers etched on simple markers, many of which have since been lost to time. Visitors to the grounds speak of overwhelming sorrow. They describe hearing faint voices in the wind or seeing silhouettes wandering between the trees where the cemetery once spread wide. One former employee recalled seeing a woman in white walking along the old path to the chapel. When he hurried after her, she disappeared into thin air. Another chilling tale involves the old surgical wing. Explorers who managed to enter after its closure claimed to hear the clatter of surgical instruments echoing down the hall. Yet the room stood empty, layered in dust. Some even swear they heard muffled screams, as though a patient were enduring a long-forgotten procedure. By the time Stockton State Hospital closed in the late 1990s, its haunted reputation was well established. Locals still whisper of the restless spirits that roam the grounds, tied forever to a place that was meant to heal, but only deepened their suffering. Number 10. Modesto State Hospital, Modesto in the Central Valley. Another hospital carries a reputation for both tragedy and haunting. Modesto State Hospital, founded in the early 20th century, was intended to relieve the overcrowding of larger institutions. Instead, it became infamous in its own right. Life inside was harsh. Patients often spent years in barren wards, isolated from the outside world. Medical practices ranged from the experimental to the cruel. Electric shocks, forced labor, and even sterilizations were carried out in the name of progress. Stories of unexplained deaths were common. Some patients slipped away quietly in the night, but others died suddenly, with no cause ever recorded. Staff turnover was high, and rumors of abuse were whispered in Modesto for decades. The hospital's darker reputation, however, comes from its ghostly tales. Those who have visited after hours speak of lights flickering on and off in abandoned rooms. Shadows glide along the walls, and cold drafts sweep through the corridors with no explanation. One chilling account comes from a night guard who patrolled the grounds in the 1970s. He told of hearing footsteps trailing behind him as he walked the old men's ward. When he turned, no one was there, but the steps continued, closing in until he fled the building. Others describe a figure known locally as the patient. This apparition is said to be a tall, gaunt man in a hospital gown who appears at the end of hallways and then vanishes without a trace. Some claim he follows intruders out of the building, lingering in the parking lot before dissolving into the night air. The cemetery attached to Modesto State Hospital adds to its eerie aura. Graves lie in uneven rows, many unmarked, the identities of the dead lost forever. Visitors walking among them report an overwhelming feeling of dread, as though unseen eyes are watching from every side. Though the hospital closed decades ago, its legend endures. For locals, Modesto is more than a relic of medical history. It is a place where the line between life and death has blurred, and where the patient's cries may still echo on the wind. We are now 5 hospitals into our journey. Already the stories grow heavier, the hauntings more vivid, the sorrow more palpable. And yet, with 9 more hospitals to go, the darkest and most terrifying tales still lie ahead. Number 9. Patton State Hospital, San Bernardino. Founded in 1893, Patton State Hospital was built at the foot of the San Bernardino Mountains. Originally called the Highland Insane Asylum, it was designed to house 1,000 patients, but within decades the number doubled. The result was overcrowding, desperation, and despair. Patton's reputation was marred by scandal. During the 20th century, the hospital became notorious for forced sterilizations under California's eugenics program. Patients deemed unfit were permanently altered without their consent, their futures stolen in sterile rooms. For many, Patton became less a place of healing and more a place of punishment. The grounds of the hospital are vast, filled with courtyards, tunnels, and wards that seem to stretch endlessly. Staff have long whispered of strange activity in these spaces. Some report the sensation of being watched in empty corridors, while others hear footsteps pacing the floors above them when no one is there. One former nurse told the story of a locked ward where the lights flickered every evening at the same hour. Electrical checks revealed no fault, yet the flickering continued for years. She swore she once saw a man in a hospital gown standing beneath the swinging light bulb, his face hidden, until he vanished before her eyes. Security officers describe hearing the clang of metal doors slamming shut, though all the doors remained bolted open. Others speak of screams erupting suddenly from the empty isolation cells, so piercing they left the staff shaken for hours afterward. Perhaps most unsettling are the tales of the hospital's cemetery. Thousands of patients who died at Patton were buried here, their graves marked only by numbers. Many locals believe their unrest fuels the hauntings that plague the hospital to this day. Patton remains operational, housing patients even now. But those who work within its walls admit there are places they will not walk alone, even in daylight. The past is never far behind, and at Patton, it feels as though the shadows themselves are alive. Number 8. Los Angeles County General Hospital, Los Angeles. Towering over Boyle Heights, the Los Angeles County General Hospital opened its doors in 1933. It was one of the largest medical facilities in the world at the time, a symbol of modern medicine and progress. Yet within its walls, countless tragedies unfolded. The hospital became the site of thousands of emergency cases, from car accidents to violent crimes. The sheer number of deaths that passed through its trauma wards left a heavy imprint on the building. Generations of doctors and nurses carried the weight of what they had witnessed. But it is the ghost stories that make County General infamous. Staff working night shifts have long reported hearing the squeak of gurney wheels in deserted hallways. Others describe phantom cries from the maternity ward, where mothers once labored in desperation. One chilling account comes from a surgeon who, while walking down a corridor, saw a man in a hospital gown limping ahead of him. The figure turned into a room. When the doctor followed, he found the room empty. the bedsheets untouched. Another story tells of a woman in white who appears in the stairwells. She is said to glide silently upward before fading into the shadows. Some believe she was a patient who died during childbirth, forever searching for the child she never held. The morgue beneath the hospital adds yet another layer to its legend. Medical staff have described feelings of dread when entering, and some refuse to go down alone. Doors have been known to open on their own, and drawers slide out without a hand to guide them. Even after parts of the hospital were closed and newer facilities built, the old tower still looms. Explorers who managed to sneak inside speak of cold winds sweeping through sealed rooms and the eerie sensation of unseen eyes following their every move. For Los Angeles, County General is more than a hospital. It is a place where the sheer volume of suffering has created echoes that refuse to fade. Those who have worked its halls know that even the brightest lights cannot drive out the shadows completely. 9 through 8, both sprawling institutions, both steeped in stories of pain, loss, and spectral presences that cannot be explained. But as our countdown continues, the hauntings will grow more vivid, and the histories more sinister. Ahead lie hospitals where death was not only common, but constant, and where the living and the dead still seem to share the same halls. Number 7. Camarillo State Hospital. Camarillo State Hospital opened in 1936 on the outskirts of Ventura County. Built during the Great Depression, it was designed to hold thousands of patients suffering from mental illness. Its vast grounds stretched over 1,000 acres, and at its peak, it became one of the largest psychiatric institutions in the United States. At first, Camarillo was hailed as progressive, offering new methods of treatment. But as years passed, stories of neglect and abuse began to surface. Overcrowding grew severe, and patients often lived in deplorable conditions. Lobotomies, shock therapy, and heavy sedation became the standard, leaving many patients broken and voiceless. The sheer scale of the hospital made it a city unto itself. It had its own fire department, dairy, farm, and even a jail. But beneath the surface, suffering thrived in silence. Generations of families whispered warnings about Camarillo, calling it a place where people disappeared. The hauntings are as expansive as the grounds themselves. Visitors report the sound of children's laughter echoing in abandoned halls, though the children's ward has been empty for decades. Cold breezes sweep through sealed rooms, and shadows dart across walls where no one stands. One story that repeats often is that of a woman seen near the old tuberculosis ward. She appears in a hospital gown, her face obscured, her figure pale as smoke. Witnesses claim she turns as if to speak, only to dissolve into thin air. Staff who worked the night shift spoke of hearing doors slamming in distant corridors. Some described the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth outside their offices, yet when they looked, the hallways were silent and still. Others refused to enter the basements at all, claiming an overwhelming sense of dread pressed against them in the darkness. Camarillo closed in 1997, and today the California State University Channel Islands campus stands on its grounds. Students and faculty alike tell of eerie encounters, lights switching on in locked classrooms, whispers in stairwells, and apparitions wandering the old hospital wings repurposed into lecture halls. The transformation from asylum to university did not drive away the spirits. If anything, the stories have only multiplied, as though the echoes of the past refuse to yield to the future. Camarillo State Hospital remains one of California's most enduring haunted sites, a place where thousands of restless voices still call out, unheard but never absent. Number 6, Downey Insane Asylum. Downey, hidden in Southern California's sprawl, once stood the Downey Insane Asylum, later renamed Rancho Los Amigos Hospital. Founded in the late 1800s, it began as a poor farm before evolving into a facility for the mentally ill and physically disabled. The asylum soon gained a grim reputation, one that has never faded. The wards were crowded and underfunded. Patients, many of them destitute, lived in conditions that would be condemned today. Isolation cells, crude restraints, and neglect were common, and countless lives ended quietly within its walls. One of the darkest chapters in Downey's history lies in its forgotten cemetery. Hundreds of patients were buried in unmarked graves, their names lost to history. The anonymity of their deaths gave rise to the belief that their spirits never left the grounds. When the asylum expanded into Rancho Los Amigos Hospital, its darker reputation only grew. Legends tell of shadow figures roaming the hallways at night, accompanied by whispers too faint to understand. Former staff described the eerie sensation of being followed as they made their rounds, though no one else was present. One chilling tale involves the old laundry building, where workers claimed to hear the cries of children echoing late into the night. Yet no children were ever housed in that part of the facility. Explorers who entered after the hospital closed recounted seeing faces pressed against broken windows, only to vanish when approached. The most notorious stories come from the underground tunnels. Built to connect different wings of the hospital, these tunnels are said to be the epicenter of paranormal activity. People who entered often reported sudden drops in temperature and the feeling of unseen hands brushing against their skin. Some fled in panic after hearing voices whisper their names in the dark. Though much of the hospital now lies abandoned, the stories have not stopped. Locals speak of strange lights flickering across the ruins at night, and ghost hunters claim to have captured unexplained sounds on their recordings. Downey remains a place of fascination and dread, a reminder that not all spirits rest easily. We have now reached the halfway point of our journey. 7 hospitals have revealed their secrets, and each has grown darker, more disturbing than the last. But ahead lie the final 5, sites of tragedy so profound and hauntings so chilling that they have cemented their place in California's darkest history. Number 5. Pacific State Hospital, Pomona. In 1927, the state of California opened Pacific State Hospital in Pomona. Its mission was to house the developmentally disabled, but in practice, it became a place of confinement, overcrowding, and despair. Thousands of men, women, and children lived here, many for their entire lives. Over the decades, Pacific State became infamous for its conditions. Patients endured neglect, overmedication, and harsh treatment at the hands of overwhelmed staff. Investigations in the mid-20th century revealed shocking stories of abuse. Children were strapped to beds, patients were restrained for days, and medical experiments were rumored to have taken place in secret. The hospital's history is riddled with death. Tuberculosis, influenza, and other outbreaks swept through the wards, claiming countless lives. Many of the dead were buried on the property itself, their graves unmarked, their identities forgotten. It is little wonder, then, that the site grew a reputation for hauntings. Those who ventured into the hospital after its closure spoke of eerie encounters. Whispers carried through empty rooms, and doors opened and closed as though guided by unseen hands. Some described the sound of children crying in the night, their voices faint yet piercing, echoing across the deserted wards. One story tells of a nurse who worked in the children's wing in the 1950s. She swore she often saw a small boy standing at the end of the hall, his gown too large, his eyes downcast. When she approached, he would vanish into the wall. She carried that memory with her until the day she died, convinced the child was one of the forgotten souls left behind. Paranormal investigators who visited Pacific State captured unexplained recordings, voices calling for help, or simply whispering words no one could understand. Several reported sudden drops in temperature, and some even fled in fear after seeing shadowy figures moving through the halls. Though the hospital no longer operates under its original name, the stories of Pacific State remain etched into Pomona's history. For many, it symbolizes the darkest side of institutional care, where lives were lost not only to illness, but to neglect. And in those silent corridors, the voices of the forgotten are said to linger still. Number 4. Queen of Angels Hospital, Los Angeles. Rising above Los Angeles in 1926, the Queen of Angels Hospital was once a symbol of Catholic charity and medical progress. Its Spanish-style architecture and towering presence made it one of the city's most recognizable landmarks. But behind the grandeur lay stories that would soon weave it into the fabric of haunted California. For decades, the hospital served thousands of patients. It saw births, recoveries, and miracles, but also countless deaths. Its emergency rooms were filled with accident victims, its wards with the terminally ill, and its morgue with the city's forgotten. The combination of tragedy and faith gave the hospital a strange aura, one that many still feel today. When Queen of Angels closed its doors in 1989, the building was left eerily still, but almost immediately stories began to circulate of ghostly activity. Security guards spoke of hearing footsteps echo through the empty halls. Others claimed to see robed nuns gliding silently down the staircases, their faces hidden in shadow. One particularly chilling tale comes from a film crew. The hospital was often used as a filming location after its closure, but many crews reported strange experiences. Lights would flicker, equipment malfunctioned, and cold drafts swept through sealed rooms. Several actors described seeing shadowy figures standing at the edges of their vision, only to vanish when confronted. The maternity ward is said to be one of the most haunted parts of the hospital. Visitors tell of phantom cries of newborns, and some claim to have seen nurses tending to invisible patients. One caretaker recalled walking past an empty room when he suddenly heard the sound of lullabies being sung softly in Spanish. When he opened the door, the room was empty. The chapel remains another focal point of paranormal reports. Candles that had been extinguished were found lit again. The scent of incense lingers in the air, though no services have been held there for decades. Some believe that the spirits of nuns and priests continue their work, tending to souls even in death. Today, Queen of Angels is partially repurposed, but the stories of hauntings have not faded. Its long corridors, ornate staircases, and shadowed chapels remain steeped in mystery. For many, the Queen of Angels stands not only as a monument of faith and medicine, but also as one of Los Angeles's most haunted relics. We now stand at the threshold of the final three. These last hospitals are the darkest, the most terrifying, and the most documented in California's haunted history. They are places where history, tragedy, and the supernatural intertwine so completely that the walls themselves seem alive with memory. If the stories we've heard so far have chilled you, prepare yourself, for the top three will shake you to the core. Number 3, Linda Vista Community Hospital, Los Angeles. At the edge of Boyle Heights in East Los Angeles stands a building that has terrified generations, Linda Vista Community Hospital. Opened in 1905 as the Santa Fe Coast Lines Hospital, it was originally built to treat injured railroad workers. What began as a place of recovery soon became one of the most notorious haunted sites in California. By the mid-20th century, Linda Vista had transformed into a community hospital serving the surrounding neighborhoods. But with poverty rising and crime escalating, the hospital grew overwhelmed. The emergency rooms were flooded with victims of stabbings, shootings, and accidents. Tragedy became a daily occurrence, and the walls of Linda Vista absorbed it all. As medicine advanced, larger hospitals drew patients away, leaving Linda Vista with fewer resources. By the 1980s, it had gained a grim reputation as a place of death rather than healing. Patients were said to fear being sent there, convinced they would not leave alive. In 1991, the hospital closed its doors for good, but its story was far from over. The hauntings began almost immediately. Security guards tasked with watching the abandoned building reported strange sounds, footsteps echoing in empty hallways, whispers in deserted wards, and the distant squeak of gurney wheels rolling through the night. Lights flickered on and off without power, and shadows glided across walls as though the hospital was still alive with activity. One of the most famous apparitions is said to be a young girl. She appears on the 3rd floor, dressed in a hospital gown, her hair falling over her face. Witnesses claim she sometimes holds a ball, rolling it slowly along the floor before disappearing into the darkness. Others describe her as simply watching from doorways, silent and unmoving, until she vanishes. Another recurring figure is that of a nurse named Martha, who supposedly worked at Linda Vista in the 1940s. She is said to appear in the surgical ward, tending to invisible patients. Several investigators swear they saw her standing at the end of a hallway, only for her to fade away the moment they called out. Locals believe she is still on duty, forever bound to her hospital. Linda Vista has become a magnet for paranormal investigators and filmmakers alike. Shows such as Ghost Adventures and The Ghost Hunters filmed episodes here, capturing strange phenomena that added to its reputation. Thermal cameras recorded unexplained cold spots moving through rooms. Electronic voice phenomena, disembodied voices were captured, calling out words like leave and help. One team reported hearing the distinct sound of a child laughing, followed by a ball rolling across the floor. Another described feeling a hand brush against their shoulder in an empty hallway. Several investigators fled the building in terror after hearing screams echo through the morgue. The surgical suites are said to be among the most haunted parts of Linda Vista. Explorers describe hearing metallic clinks, as though surgical instruments are still being laid out. Some claim to have seen figures in surgical masks standing motionless in the corners, vanishing when approached. The atmosphere is so oppressive that many refuse to step inside. The basement is another source of countless stories. Dark, damp, and filled with shadows, it was once used for storage and utilities. Now it is said to be home to something darker. Visitors report feelings of being watched, sudden chills, and even the sound of growling, low and guttural, coming from the shadows. But perhaps the most unnerving stories come from those who entered the hospital alone. One urban explorer recalled hearing footsteps pacing behind him. When he turned, the hallway was empty. Moments later, he felt a breath on the back of his neck, though he stood in silence, entirely alone. He left that night and swore never to return. Despite its abandonment, Linda Vista lives on as a filming location. Countless movies and TV shows have used its eerie halls as a backdrop. But even hardened crew members admit they sometimes felt uneasy, as if they were not alone. Several productions reported sudden malfunctions with cameras and lights, only for the equipment to work perfectly once outside. The building itself seems to resist silence. Its walls groan, its doors creak, and its stairwells echo with phantom steps. Those who have dared to spend the night inside say it feels as though the hospital itself is breathing, watching, waiting. Today, Linda Vista Community Hospital stands partially repurposed, with parts of the building converted into affordable housing. Yet even with new life brought to its walls, the legends have not died. Residents and visitors still whisper of strange sounds in the night, fleeting figures in the hallways, and the overwhelming sense that the dead have not yet left. For many, Linda Vista is more than just a haunted hospital. It is a symbol of how despair and tragedy can stain a place so deeply that even time cannot cleanse it. It ranks among the most infamous haunted locations in the state, an institution where the cries of the past still echo, refusing to fade. 3 hospitals remain. If Linda Vista's restless spirits chilled you, prepare for what lies ahead. The final 2 hospitals are darker still, with histories steeped in tragedy and hauntings that have shaken even the most seasoned investigators. The next chapter of our journey will bring us closer to the very heart of California's haunted legacy. Number 2. Napa State Hospital, Napa Valley. In the heart of California, wine country, lies a place whose history is far darker than its scenic surroundings suggest. Founded in 1875, Napa State Hospital was built to house the mentally ill, designed as part of the 19th century movement toward massive asylums. Its original intent was treatment, rest, and rehabilitation, but what followed was a legacy of suffering, overcrowding, and tragedy. The hospital was once one of the largest mental health facilities in the state. At its peak, it held more than 5,000 patients, men, women, and children struggling with illnesses that medicine at the time could barely understand. Overcrowding quickly became a problem. Patients were crammed into wards, neglected, and subjected to harsh practices. Treatments in the early years were primitive at best, cruel at worst. Electroshock therapy, hydrotherapy baths, and insulin coma treatments were common. Lobotomies were performed on patients deemed incurable. The grounds, meant to be a sanctuary, became instead a prison of despair. Death was no stranger to Napa State. Disease outbreaks swept through its crowded wards, claiming hundreds of lives. Many of the deceased were buried on site, their graves unmarked, their names erased from history. To this day, a cemetery on the hospital grounds holds thousands of patients who were forgotten by their families and society. It is little surprise, then, that stories of hauntings soon emerged. Staff, patients, and later visitors all reported strange occurrences. Dark shadows moving across walls, voices calling out in empty corridors, and sudden icy chills that froze the blood. The atmosphere was heavy, thick with the weight of sorrow and suffering. One of the most commonly reported apparitions is that of a woman in white. She is said to wander the old female ward, weeping softly, Witnesses describe her as translucent, her face obscured by her long hair. Some believe she was a patient who took her own life after years of confinement. Another recurring legend tells of a man in restraints. Visitors have seen him stumbling down the halls, his arms bound, his mouth open in a silent scream. He vanishes when approached, leaving only the faint sound of chains rattling in the dark. Staff working night shifts often reported eerie experiences. Some heard the sound of doors slamming and locked wings. Others described hearing footsteps pacing the hallways, even when they were entirely alone. One nurse recalled seeing a figure standing at the end of a corridor, only to discover that the hallway cameras had captured nothing at all. Paranormal investigators have flocked to Napa State Hospital over the years, determined to document its eerie reputation. Many left with chilling evidence: unexplained EVPs, sudden battery drains, and equipment interference. One team claimed to capture a clear recording of a voice whispering the word "help" inside a locked ward. Another described hearing faint screaming echoing from the morgue long after it had been abandoned. But Napa's legends are not confined to ghost stories alone. There have been tales of darker, more oppressive presences lurking in the shadows. Some visitors reported being overcome by sudden nausea, dizziness, or intense feelings of dread when walking through certain areas. A few even claimed to feel unseen hands pushing them or brushing against their arms. The cemetery remains the most unnerving part of the grounds. Thousands of patients lie there, their resting places unmarked, their stories untold. Those who visit describe feeling watched, and many leave small offerings, flowers, coins, or prayers to honor the forgotten souls. Some have heard whispers drifting through the trees, voices calling faintly from the earth itself. Modern Napa State Hospital still operates as a psychiatric facility, but much of the old campus has been shuttered. The history, however, cannot be erased. Current staff occasionally whisper about their own unsettling encounters. One guard swore he saw a patient standing at a gate long after visiting hours had ended, only to realize no such patient existed. The sheer scale of Napa AS suffering has made it one of the most infamous institutions in California. For over a century, its halls bore witness to pain, despair, and death. And even as time passes, the echoes remain. The weeping woman, the restrained man, the voices that plead for help. Each is a reminder that history's scars do not fade easily. To stand in Napa State Hospital is to stand amid the weight of thousands of forgotten lives. And for those who believe in the paranormal, it is one of the clearest places where the past refuses to die. We have now reached the threshold of the final and most terrifying hospital of all. Number 1 is not just haunted, it is legendary. Its dark history, chilling encounters, and overwhelming atmosphere have made it the most feared medical institution in California. Stay with me as we step into the shadows of the state's most haunted hospital. Number 1. Agnew's Insane Asylum, Santa Clara. At the very top of our list stands a place so steeped in tragedy and darkness that it has earned its reputation as California's most haunted hospital, Agnew's Insane Asylum. Also known as Agnew State Hospital, it opened in 1885, a sprawling psychiatric institution in Santa Clara. Its red brick buildings rose against the California sky, promising compassion and care for the mentally ill. But behind its walls, a far darker story unfolded. The asylum was designed in the Kirkbride style, vast wings, towering wards, and endless corridors. It was built to hold around 200 patients, but like many institutions of its time, it soon became overcrowded. Patients lived in cramped quarters, many subjected to harsh treatments. Whispers of abuse, neglect, and inhumane practices were common, though rarely documented in official reports. The greatest tragedy struck in 1906, when the San Francisco earthquake tore through Northern California. Agnew's Asylum collapsed in the destruction. Entire wards crumbled, trapping patients and staff inside. More than 100 people, men, women, and children, lost their lives within minutes. Some were crushed beneath falling stone. Others burned in the fires that followed. The survivors spoke of screams echoing through the ruins, of desperate hands clawing at debris, of loved ones buried alive. That disaster alone was enough to brand Agnew's as cursed ground. and it was only the beginning. The asylum was rebuilt and expanded, reopening years later with even larger facilities. But the tragedies continued. Patients endured electroshock therapy, ice baths, and lobotomies. Stories of mistreatment circulated, patients restrained for days or used in questionable medical experiments. For many, Agnews became not a place of healing, but a prison of torment. It is here, amid this layered history of trauma, that hauntings have thrived. For over a century, countless witnesses have reported chilling experiences on the grounds of Agnews. Apparitions of patients have been seen wandering the ruins, their faces vacant, their cries faint in the night. Voices whisper through the empty corridors, speaking words no living soul can understand. One of the most persistent legends is that of the crying woman. She is said to roam the old asylum grounds, dressed in tattered clothing, her sobs echoing in the darkness. Some believe she lost her children in the 1906 earthquake and now wanders eternally in search of them. Visitors who have seen her describe overwhelming feelings of grief and despair, as though her sorrow seeps into their very bones. Another chilling account comes from construction workers who later redeveloped part of the asylum grounds. They reported hearing screams erupting from sealed-off tunnels beneath the site. Others claimed to see fleeting figures darting through the corner of their vision, only to vanish into thin air. One worker swore he felt a hand grip his shoulder so tightly he stumbled forward, but when he turned, no one was there. The morgue, once used to house the countless dead from the earthquake and later patient deaths, is said to be the most haunted of all. Those who dare to enter describe hearing the sound of drawers sliding open, as though unseen attendants still work among the dead. Some investigators reported seeing body-shaped impressions appear briefly on gurneys, only to fade away before their eyes. Over the years, paranormal teams have documented extraordinary evidence at Agnews. Disembodied voices captured on recorders, orbs of light drifting through abandoned rooms, and cold spots so severe they left frost on investigators' equipment. Some teams even claim to see full-bodied apparitions, men in hospital gowns, women in restraints, children peering silently from corners. But perhaps the most unsettling element of Agnews is not what is seen, but what is felt. Visitors speak of an oppressive weight that presses down on them, a suffocating energy that grows stronger the deeper they move into the grounds. Many leave shaken, convinced they encountered something they cannot explain. Though much of the old asylum has been demolished or repurposed, its legacy lingers. Modern developments stand on the site today, but residents and workers still whisper of strange activity. Flickering lights, phantom footsteps in empty rooms, and the chilling sound of weeping drifting through the night. The land itself seems unwilling to forget. Agnews Insane Asylum is more than just a haunted hospital. It is a place where tragedy piled upon tragedy, where lives were lost in fire, stone, and neglect. Its haunted reputation is not built on a single ghost story, but on the combined weight of human suffering that soaked into its walls and earth. For those who believe Agnews is the very embodiment of California's haunted past. And for skeptics, even they cannot deny the chilling history that gives rise to its legends. To stand where Agnews once loomed is to stand on haunted ground, a place where the dead still walk, where sorrow still lingers, and where the past refuses to rest. With Agnews at the top of our list, our journey through California's haunted hospitals nears its end. But the shadows we've uncovered are not so easily left behind. From forgotten asylums to decaying wards, each site carries echoes of pain, loss, and restless spirits. And as you leave these stories behind tonight, remember, some doors, once opened, are not so easily closed. Our journey has taken us deep into the heart of California's darkest medical history. We've walked the endless corridors of abandoned asylums, listened to the whispers in forgotten wards, and felt the weight of tragedy pressing from the walls of hospitals long left behind. Each site carried its own story, its own shadows, its own restless spirits. From the cries of lost children at Pacific State Hospital, to the ghostly nuns of Queen of Angels, to the chilling apparitions of Linda Vista, every place revealed another layer of terror. Napa State Hospital's sorrowful cemetery and the devastation of Agnews Asylum's earthquake tragedy reminded us that behind every haunting lies real human suffering. The ghosts we speak of are not just legends. They are echoes of real lives, men, women, and children whose stories ended within those walls. But now, as we step back from the darkness, we are left with one haunting question. Do the dead truly linger among us? Or are these stories only reflections of our own fears? For some, these tales are entertainment, chilling folklore told under the cover of night. But for those who have stood inside these hospitals, who have felt the breath of something unseen on their skin, who have heard the voices when no one was there, these stories are far more than myth. They are reminders that history leaves scars, and some scars never fade. So now I ask you, which of these hospitals chilled you the most? Was it the restless spirits of Linda Vista, forever replaying their final days? The lost souls of Napa, buried in unmarked graves? Or the crushing tragedy of Agnews, where an earthquake turned a hospital into a tomb? Leave your answer in the comments below. Share your own stories, your own experiences, because California's haunted history is not yet finished. And perhaps your voice will join the chorus of others who have felt the chill of the unknown. If you found yourself captivated by these tales, don't forget to subscribe to Vanguard Vault. We will continue this journey across the country, uncovering the most haunted hospitals, asylums, and medical institutions in every state. The next chapter awaits, and trust me, you will not want to miss the horrors that lie beyond California. Be sure to explore our Haunted Hospitals playlist, where you can revisit other stories of tragedy and spirits that refuse to rest. Each video peels back another layer of America's haunted past, guiding you deeper into the shadows. Before we part tonight, let me leave you with this thought. A hospital is supposed to be a place of healing, a sanctuary where life is preserved and restored. But history has shown us that even these halls of hope can become prisons of despair. And sometimes, when the suffering is too great, when the pain is too deep, the spirits of the lost remain, forever pacing the wards, forever whispering in the night. As you turn off the lights this evening, remember the stories you've heard. Remember the figures that walk the halls of California's most haunted hospitals. And should you ever find yourself near one of these sites, listen closely. The silence may not be silence at all. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows. This has been Vanguard Vault. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and never stop watching the darkness.